In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a glamorous actress, Miss Lydia Vance, dazzles with her emerald necklace till it vanishes in a daring theft that shocks the countryside. But was it truly stolen? Enter Miss Jane Marple, a quiet spinster, with a razor-sharp mind, who unravels a web of deception woven by desperation and ambition, as whispers of debt, a cunning producer, and a staged crime surface. Miss Marple's keen eye reveals the truth hidden in plain sight, a scandal of greed and glamour, where nothing is as it seems. Welcome to the affair at the Bungalow, where secrets unravel in the heart of an English village. Chapter 1. The Sparkle of Scandal, the village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the gentle folds of the English countryside, was not accustomed to glamour. Its days passed in a predictable rhythm, the clink of teacups at the vicarage, the rustle of newspapers at the post office, the soft hum of gossip over garden fences. So, when Miss Lydia Vance, an actress whose name blazed across London's theatre marquees, descended upon the village in the autumn of 1925, she brought with her a shimmer of scandal that set every tongue wagging. Miss Vance had taken Willow Bungalow, a quaint ivor-clad retreat on the village's western edge, under the pretense of seeking solitude after a grueling season on the West End stage. Yet solitude, it seemed, was the last thing she desired. Her arrival was marked by a flurry of activity. Sleek motorcars from the city rolled up the lane, disgorging guests in furs and silk. Laughter and jazz music spilled from the bungalow's windows into the quiet nights, and Miss Vance herself, with her golden curls and flashing smile, was seen strolling the village green. Her emerald necklace, rumoured gift from a mysterious admirer, catching the sunlight like a beacon. On a crisp October morning, as the first leaves began to fall, St. Mary Mead awoke to a sensation. The news spread from the butcher's to the baker's, from the churchyard to the Blue Boar. Miss Vance's emerald necklace had been stolen. The theft had occurred sometime in the night, discovered when the actress's maid, a nervous girl named Elsie, found the dressing table bare. Constable Pauk, a solid man whose experience leaned more toward stray sheep than jewel thieves, was summoned to the bungalow. By mid-morning, his earnest but baffled inquiries had yielded little, and the village buzzed with speculation in her neat drawing-room at Dame Mead Cottage. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm. The morning light fell softly on her white hair and the delicate lace of her shawl, but her eyes, bright and unclouded, betrayed a mind far from idle. Her nephew Raymond, a writer fond of dismissing St. Mary Mead as stagnant, often teased her for finding drama in the mundane. Yet Miss Marple knew that even the quietest villagers held secrets. She had heard of the theft from Miss Weatherby, who had stopped by with a basket of apples and a wealth of details, delivered with the precision of a town crier. "It's a shocking business, Miss Marple," Miss Weatherby had said, her thin lips pursed. "That necklace worth thousands, they say, taken right from under her nose. And those parties she throws, with all sorts coming and going. Well, it's no surprise, is it?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "They say Mr. Gerald Rain was there last night. You know that producer fellow, not the sort we're used to in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple had nodded, her expression mild, but her mind was already at work. She knew of Miss Vance, of course. The actress's name had appeared in the London papers Raymond occasionally sent her. A rising star, they called her, though whispers of financial strain and a faltering career trailed in her wake. The emerald necklace, so prominently displayed, seemed less a treasure than a statement, and now it was gone. In a theft that promised to draw every eye to St. Mary Mead and to Miss Vance herself. As Miss Weatherby prattled on, Miss Marple's needles paused. She recalled a long-ago incident in the village, when young Clara Pritchett had claimed her brooch stolen, only for it to be found, rather conveniently, after her suitor had proposed. People, Miss Marple mused, were predictable in their deceptions, whether in a village or on a stage. She set her knitting aside and reached for her hat. "I think," she said to Miss Weatherby, her voice gentle but firm, "I shall take a walk to the vicarage. The air is so fresh today, don't you think?" Miss Weatherby, sensing she had lost her audience, departed, and Miss Marple stepped into the October sunshine, her mind turning over the sparkle of scandal that had fallen upon St. Mary Mead. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The October sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the hedgerows as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Gossington Hall. The invitation to tea from Mrs. Dolly Bantry, a friend whose enthusiasm for village intrigue rivaled her own, had come at an opportune moment. News of the theft at Willow Bungalow had spread like wildfire, and Miss Marple, with her quiet curiosity, knew that Mrs. Bantry's drawing-room would be a trove of fresh details. Her black lace-up boots crunched softly on the gravel path, and her gloved hands clasped a small reticule, but her mind was far from the pleasantries of tea. The emerald necklace, the actress, the open French windows already. The threads of the affair were weaving a pattern in her thoughts. Gossington Hall, with its Georgian symmetry and ivy-draped walls, stood as a bastion of respectability in the village. Mrs. Bantry, a robust woman with a penchant for bright scarves and brighter gossip, greeted Miss Marple at the door with a gleam in her eye. "Jane, you're just in time," she exclaimed, ushering her into the hall. "I've been to the bungalow this morning. What a to-do! You must hear everything." Miss Marple, removing her hat with a practised grace, allowed herself a small smile. Dolly's eagerness was as predictable as the seasons, and no less useful for it. The drawing-room was warm, its chintz curtains drawn back to admit the autumn light. A silver tea service gleamed on the table, flanked by scones and a pot of Mrs. Bantry's prized strawberry jam. As they settled into cushioned chairs, Mrs. Bantry launched into her account with the fervour of a storyteller. "I went to offer my sympathies, of course," she began, pouring tea with a flourish. "Poor Miss Vance was in a state positively theatrical, though I suppose that's to be expected. She was draped in a silk dressing-gown, green as those emeralds she's lost, and her hair all tumbling down like some tragic heroine. There was quite a little crowd there, Mrs. Price from the vicarage, that nosy Miss Weatherby, and old Dr. Haydock, who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes fixed on Mrs. Bantry with an attentive calm. "And what did Miss Vance say about the theft?" she asked, her voice soft but deliberate. "Oh, she was full of it," Mrs. Bantry replied, leaning forward. "She said she'd retired late last night after one of her gatherings, nothing grand. Just a few friends from London, she claimed. The necklace was on her dressing table, as she always leaves it, and when she woke this morning, it was gone, vanished. The French windows in her bedroom were ajar, and she's convinced some thief slipped in from the garden. Constable Polk was there, poking about, but he looked utterly lost. No wonder poor manual thefts aren't exactly his line." Miss Marple's needles, which she had drawn from her reticule to occupy her hands, clicked softly. "The French windows," she murmured. "How curious. Were there any signs of an intruder?" That's the odd thing, Mrs. Bantry said, her brow furrowing. I asked Poke myself, and he said the lawn outside was pristine. Not a footprint, not a blade of grass out of place, and the dew hadn't been disturbed. You'd think a thief would leave some trace, wouldn't you? But those windows were definitely open, and Miss Vance swears she locked them before bed. Miss Marple's expression remained benign, but her mind was alight. She knew the bungalow layout from a visit years ago, when it had been occupied by a retired colonel with a fondness for roses. The French windows opened onto a small terrace, beyond which lay a well-tended lawn bordered by shrubs. A thief approaching in the night would need to cross that lawn and do, as she well knew, was an unforgiving witness. She recalled a case in her youth, when a housemaid's tale of a midnight prowler had unravelled because of an untouched flower-bed, and the room itself, she asked, was anything else disturbed? Not a thing, according to Miss Vance, Mrs. Bantry said. The dressing-table was tidy, her other jewels a pearl brooch, some rings were untouched. Only the necklace was taken. She kept saying it was her most valuable piece, a gift from some admirer she wouldn't name. Naturally, that set Miss Weatherby whispering about Mr. Gerald Raine, the producer. You know how she is. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. Gerald Raine's name had surfaced before, in Miss Weatherby's breathless account at Dame Mead Cottage. A man of charm and questionable morals, he was said to be Miss Vance's mentor and possibly more. The village had already linked him to the bungalow's late-night gatherings, where champagne flowed and jazz records spun. And was Mr. Raine present at this gathering last night? She asked. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. I didn't ask, but I wouldn't be surprised. Miss Vance was vague about her guests, just a few friends, she said. But you know how these theatre people are, Jane. All glamour and secrets. I did overhear Mrs. Price say she saw a strange car parked near the bungalow yesterday evening. A big black thing with city plates, probably one of Miss Vance's crowd. Miss Marple set her teacup down, her fingers brushing the lace doily beneath. It, a strange car, vague guests, an undisturbed lawn. The details were like pieces of a jigsaw, not yet forming a picture, but hinting at one. She thought of Miss Vance, whose every gesture seemed calculated for an audience. An actress, she mused, lived by attention, and a theft especially of so dazzling a prize would draw every eye. She recalled a young woman in St. Mary Mead years ago who had lost a silver locket to win sympathy from a suitor. The locket, of course, had been found in her sewing basket, and the suitor had quietly left the village. It is curious, Dolly, Miss Marple said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, how some losses are so convenient. Mrs. Bantry, buttering a scone, paused. Convenient? What do you mean, Jane? You don't think Miss Vance so? Surely not. She was in tears, or near enough, and that necklace was worth a fortune. Miss Marple smiled, a faint, knowing curve of her lips. People weep for many reasons, my dear, and fortunes, as you know, can be made in more ways than one. She did not elaborate, for Mrs. Bantry, though a keen observer, was not one for subtleties. Instead, Miss Marple turned the conversation to the vicarage's upcoming fate, letting Dolly prattle on while her own thoughts drifted back to the bungalow. The scene, as Mrs. Bantry had painted it, was vivid in her mind. Miss Vance in her silk gown, playing the bereaved victim. The open windows, a stage prop in a carefully lit drama. The untouched lawn, a silent contradiction. She considered the necklace itself, so prominently displayed since Miss Vance's arrival. It was not merely a jewel, but a symbol, a magnet for attention. and attention, for an actress, was currency. Miss Marple knew little of the theatre, but she knew human nature, and she had seen its patterns repeated in drawing rooms and village shops, in whispered confidences and public displays. As tea drew to a close, Mrs. Bantry, ever restless, proposed a walk to the village shop. "We might hear more," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Everyone's talking about it, and you know how the shop is better than a newspaper." Miss Marple agreed, though her purpose was less to gather gossip than to observe. The village, she knew, was a living tapestry, its threads of rumour and fact interwoven. A word here, a glance there, could reveal as much as a constable's report. The shop, a cramped emporium of tinned goods and sewing notions, was abuzz when they arrived. Mrs. Clegg, the shopkeeper, was holding court behind the counter, her apron stretched tight over her ample frame. "It's a disgrace," she was saying to Miss Hartnell, a spinster with a penchant for indignation, "bringing all those city folk here, and now this. I said to Mr. Clegg only yesterday, no good comes of such carryings." Miss Hartnell nodded vigorously. "And that maid of hers, Elsie, told my girl the bungalow was in chaos last night. Glasses everywhere, music till all hours. If you ask me, one of those guests took the necklace. Theatre people. No morals at all." Miss Marple, selecting a skein of wool from a basket, listened without seeming to. Elsie's account, filtered through Mrs. Clegg's outrage, was second-hand but telling. A chaotic party suggested opportunity a moment when a thief might slip unnoticed into a bedroom. Yet the untouched lawn nagged at her. She thought of the French windows, their hinges likely oiled for easy opening. A thief from within, perhaps. One of the guests, emboldened by wine and opportunity, or something else entirely. Mrs. Bantry, purchasing a tin of biscuits, joined the conversation with gusto. "I was at the bungalow this morning," she announced, drawing all eyes. "Miss Vance is devastated, and those windows being open, well, it's clear someone crept in, isn't it?" Mrs. Clegg sniffed. "Crept in, my foot. No footprints. That's what Pope told my husband. If you ask me, it's all too neat. Like something out of one of her plays." Miss Marple's needles, tucked back into her reticule, seemed to quiver with her thoughts. Mrs. Clegg's suspicion, though born of prejudice, echoed her own. The theft was too neat, too staged. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond, who had once described the theatre as a world of illusions, Aunt Jane, where nothing is quite what it seems. Miss Vance, she suspected, was adept at illusions. As they left the shop, Mrs. Bantry linked arms with Miss Marple, her voice low. "What do you make of it, Jane? You've been awfully quiet. I know that look, you're thinking something clever." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "I am thinking, Dolly, that St. Mary Mead is never as dull as people suppose. But as for cleverness, I leave that to others. I only observe." Her tone was light, but her eyes, as they scanned the village green, were sharp as ever. The green was quiet, save for a boy kicking a ball and a pair of women chatting by the war memorial. In the distance, Willow Bungalow's chimneys peaked above the trees, a reminder of the drama unfolding within its walls. Miss Marple considered her next step. A visit to the bungalow was inevitable. She must see the scene for herself, gauge Miss Vance's performance, studied the room where the necklace had vanished. But for now, she was content to let the village's whispers gather, like leaves in a wind. "Dolly," she said, as they parted at the lane to Mead Cottage, "do let me know if you hear anything more. People talk, you know, and sometimes They say more than they mean. Mrs. Bantry laughed. You're incorrigible, Jane. I'll keep my ears open, don't you worry. With a wave, she strode off, her scarf fluttering like a banner. Miss Marple entered her cottage, the familiar scent of lavender and beeswax greeting her. She settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts were far from the wool in her hands. The affair at the bungalow was a puzzle, its pieces scattered across St. Mary Mead. The actress, the necklace, the windows. The guests each held a clue, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, would find them all. For now, she knitted and waited, knowing that in a village like hers, the truth had a way of rising to the surface, like cream in a churn. Chapter 3. The actress's tale. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, softening the edges of the village's thatched cottages and lending a deceptive calm to its bustling undercurrents. Miss Jane Marple, her black hat firmly pinned and her reticule tucked under her arm, walked with measured steps toward Willow Bungalow. The theft of Miss Lydia Vance's emerald necklace had stirred the village into a frenzy of speculation, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the rhythms of human nature, knew that the time had come to see the actress for herself. A visit, cloaked in the guise of neighbourly concern, would offer more than sympathy, would reveal the nuances of Miss Vance's performance in this curious drama. Willow Bungalow stood at the end of a winding lane, its whitewashed walls half hidden by climbing roses and its chimneys puffing lazily against the October sky. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the signs of recent activity: tire marks in the gravel drive, a discarded cigarette end near the gate, a curtain twitching briefly. In an upstairs window, the air carried the faint scent of jasmine, mingling with the sharper temps of motor oiler, reminder of the city folk who had made the bungalow their temporary stage. The door was answered by Elsie, the maid, a slight girl with anxious eyes and a cap slightly askew. Miss Vance is in the drawing room, ma'am, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, she's not herself. What with the trouble? Miss Marple nodded kindly, noting the girl's flushed cheeks and the way her hands twisted in her apron. Servants, she knew, were often the keenest observers, their loyalty tempered by the intimacy of their vantage point. She made a mental note to speak with Elsie later, when the girl's nerves might be less taut. The drawing room was a study in theatrical elegance. Heavy velvet drapes framed tall windows, their deep crimson clashing boldly with the pale green walls. A chaise longue, strewn with silk cushions, dominated one corner, while a gramophone stood silent beside a stack of jazz records. Miss Lydia Vance reclined on the chaise, her golden hair spilling over a shawl of embroidered silk, her slender fingers clutching a lace handkerchief. She rose as Miss Marple entered, her movements graceful yet deliberate, as if every gesture had been rehearsed for an unseen audience. Miss Marple, how kind of you to call, she said, her voice a melodic blend of warmth and sorrow. You've heard, of course, my poor necklace, gone. It's too dreadful. Her green eyes, luminous even in the soft light, shimmered with unshed tears, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. Miss Marple, settling into a plush armchair, observed the performance with quiet interest. The actress's beauty was undeniable, but it was her control, the careful modulation of voice, the precise tilt of her head that struck Miss Marple most. This was no impulsive display of grief. It was a scene meticulously crafted. I was so sorry to hear of your loss, my dear, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. Such a shocking thing, and in our little village. I thought I might offer what comfort I can. Perhaps you could tell me what happened." Miss Vance sighed, sinking back onto the chaise with a grace that seemed to invite sympathy. "It's all so bewildering," she began, her eyes drifting to the window as if conjuring the memory. "Last night I had a few friends here, just a small gathering, nothing extravagant. We talked, played some music, laughed a little. It was late when they left, perhaps 1 o'clock. I was tired, you see, so I went straight to my room. The necklace was on my dressing table, where I always leave it. I locked the French windows myself. I'm sure of it, and went to bed. This morning, when Elsie brought my tea, I saw the table was bare. The necklace was gone, and the windows were ajar. Someone must have crept in during the night." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind their mild expression, took in every detail: the actress's poised hands, the slight tremor in her voice, the way her gaze flickered when she mentioned the windows. "How distressing," she murmured. "And such a valuable piece, I understand. A gift, was it not?" Miss Vance hesitated, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "Yes, a gift," she said, her tone softer now, almost evasive. "From an admirer some years ago. It meant a great deal to me, more than it's worth in pounds and shillings." She smiled faintly, a wistful curve of her lips, but Miss Marple noted the absence of specifics. An admirer, unnamed and vague, was a convenient prop in a story that felt increasingly like a script. "And your guests," Miss Marple continued, her voice as light as a feather, "they were friends from London, you say? Such a comfort to have. Familiar faces in a new place." "Oh yes," Miss Vance replied, waving a hand airily. "Just a few dear friends from the theatre world. No one who would dream of such a thing as theft. They're all quite respectable in their way." Her laugh was musical, but it rang hollow, and Miss Marple caught the briefest shadow of unease. In her eyes, respectable, she thought, was a curious word, chosen with care to deflect rather than illuminate. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her knitting needles emerging from her reticule as if by habit. "It must be so difficult, my dear, to have strangers in one's home and then to suffer such a loss. I remember a time in St. Mary Mead when Mrs. Clement's silver candlesticks went missing after a garden party. It turned out to be a magpie, of all things, carrying them off to its nest. But jewels, of course, are another matter." Miss Vance's smile tightened, and she shifted on the chaise. "Indeed, Miss Marple, no magpies here, I'm afraid. Just a thief, and a clever one. The police, well, that dear Constable Poke is trying, but I fear it's beyond him. I've sent for my insurance agent, Mr. Petherick. The necklace was insured. Thank heaven, though no sum could replace its sentimental value." The mention of insurance, dropped so casually, sent a ripple through Miss Marple's thoughts. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond, who had once described the theatre as a world of precarious fortunes, where actors lived from one engagement to the next. Miss Vance, for all her glamour, might well be in need of funds, and an insurance payout especially for a jewel so recently insured would be a tidy solution. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a counterpoint to her racing mind. "How fortunate that you thought to insure it," she said, her tone all innocence. "So many forget such practicalities." Miss Vance nodded, her expression serene. "One learns to be cautious, living as I do. The theatre is a fickle mistress, and one must plan for rainy days." She rose then, crossing to a small table where a decanter of sherry gleamed. "May I offer you something, Miss Marple?" I find a little sherry soothes the nerves." Miss Marple declined with a smile, her eyes following the actress's movements. The room, she noted, was a perfect stage, the lighting soft but flattering, the furniture arranged to draw attention to its occupant, even the dressing table visible through an open door to the bedroom seemed positioned for effect, its polished surface catching the light. She thought of the French windows, described by Mrs. Bantry as ajar but unmarred by footprints. The absence of evidence was itself a clue, suggesting either an impossibly deft thief or no thief at all. As Miss Vance poured herself a small glass of sherry, Miss Marple's gaze settled on a photograph on the mantelpiece. It showed the actress, in costume, her arms outstretched, a radiant smile lighting her face. Beside it stood a silver cigarette case, engraved with initials G.R. Gerald Rain, perhaps. The producer's name had surfaced too often to be ignored, and Miss Marple filed the observation away, like a thread tucked into her knitting bag. "You must find St. Mary Mead quite dull after London," Miss Marple said, steering the conversation. Gently, "Our little village has its charms, but it lacks the excitement of the stage." Miss Vance returned to the chaise, her sherry glass cradled in her hands. "Oh, it's restful, in its way," she said. "I came here to escape the bustle, to find a little peace. But I confess I miss the theatre, the lights, the applause, the thrill of a new role. This misfortune has rather spoiled my retreat." Her voice trembled, and she dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief. But Miss Marple, watching closely, saw no tears. The performance was flawless, yet it was a performance, and Miss Marple, who had seen many such displays in her long life, felt a familiar stirring of suspicion. She thought of a girl in St. Mary Mead years ago, who had feigned illness to avoid an unwanted marriage, her sighs and swoons convincing all but Miss Marple, who had noticed the healthy flush beneath her powder. Miss Vance, she suspected, was playing a role, but to what end? The insurance, the publicity, or something deeper? Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Elsie entered, her face pale. "Begging your pardon, miss, but Mr. Polk is here. He says he's got a few more questions, if you're feeling up to it." Miss Vance's expression shifted, a flicker of irritation crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "Of course, Elsie, show him in." She turned to Miss Marple, her smile apologetic. "Duty calls, I'm afraid. But do come again, Miss Marple. It's been such a comfort to talk." Miss Marple rose, her reticule in hand. "I shan't keep you, my dear. Thank you for your hospitality, and I do hope this matter is resolved soon." She paused at the door, her eyes lingering on the dressing table in the next room. "Such a lovely room," she said softly. "It's a pity it's been touched by this trouble." As she stepped into the hall, Constable Pock entered, his helmet under his arm and his face a mask of earnest determination. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, touching his forehead. "Didn't expect to see you here. Just a neighbourly call," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "I trust you're making progress, Mr. Polk." He sighed, his broad shoulders sagging. "Trying, ma'am, but it's a queer business. No prints, no tracks, no nothing, like the thief was a ghost." He shook his head and moved past her, his boots heavy on the polished floor. Miss Marple left the bungalow, her mind alight with impressions. The actress's tale, so smoothly told, had gaps, vague guests, an unnamed admirer, a locked window conveniently ajar. The room itself, with its staged elegance, felt less like a home than a set, and Miss Vance, for all her charm, was a player in a drama of her own making. Miss Marple thought of the cigarette case, the initials GR, and the whispers of Gerald. Rain's involvement. She thought, too, of Elsie, whose nervous glances suggested she knew more than she said. The lane back to St. Mary Mead was quiet, the village settling into the drowsy hours before dusk. Miss Marple walked slowly, her thoughts weaving a pattern as intricate as her knitting. The theft was no simple crime, she was certain. It was a gambit, a move in a game whose stakes were not yet clear. She recalled a saying of her father's, often repeated in her childhood: "The truth lies in what is not said, Jane, as much as in what is." Miss Vance had said much, but what she had not said the names of her guests, the source of her necklace, the reason for her retreat to St. Mary. Mead spoke louder still, at Dame Mead Cottage. Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed. The village outside was still, but within her mind, the affair at the bungalow was taking shape. The actress's tale was a thread, bright and beguiling, but it was only one among many. Miss Marple knew that patience and a keen eye for the unspoken would unravel the rest. For now, she knitted and waited, confident that St. Mary Mead, with its whispers and watchful eyes, would yield the truth in time. Chapter 4. The village whispers. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, shrouding the village in a gauzy veil that softened its outlines and lent an air of mystery to its quiet lanes. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of tea and a slice of buttered toast, gazed out at the garden, where dew glistened on the last of the Michaelmas daisies. Her thoughts, however, were not on the flowers but on the theft at Willow Bungalow, a puzzle that grew more intricate with each passing hour. The village, she knew, was a living chronicle, its whispers and glances as telling as any police report. Today, she resolved to listen closely, to gather the threads of gossip that might weave a clearer picture of Miss Lydia Vance and her missing emerald. Necklace. The theft had ignited St. Mary Mead like a spark in dry tinder. At the post office, in the churchyard, over tea at the Blue Boar, the villagers dissected the affair with a fervour that bordered on glee. Miss Marple, whose unassuming presence made her a magnet for confidences, had already gleaned much from her visit to the bungalow and her tea with Mrs. Bantry. Miss Vance's polished tale, the undisturbed lawn, the conveniently ajar French windows all pointed to a deception, but its purpose remained elusive. Was it insurance, publicity, or something more personal? The answer, Miss Marple suspected, lay not in the actress's words, but in the villagers' unguarded chatter. After breakfast, she donned her tweed coat and a hat adorned with a single feather, its simplicity belying the sharpness of the mind. Beneath, her first stop was the post office, a cramped hub of village life where Miss Weatherby presided with the authority of a general. The bell above the door jangled as Miss Marple entered, and Miss Weatherby, sorting letters behind the counter, looked up with a gleam of anticipation. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, her voice crisp. "I suppose you've come about the bungalow business. Shocking, isn't it? A thief in our midst." Miss Marple smiled, selecting a packet of notepaper from a shelf. "Most unsettling." "Indeed," she replied. "I called on Miss Vance yesterday. Poor dear, she's quite distraught. But I'm sure you've heard all about it, Miss Weatherby. People do talk." Miss Weatherby's eyes narrowed, sensing an invitation. "Talk? They never stop." "Why, just this morning, Mrs. Clegg was in, saying that maid of Miss Vance's Elsie was near tears at the butcher's, muttering about the goings-on at the bungalow. And Mr. Hodge, the gardener, swears he saw a man skulking near the lane the night of the theft. A stranger, he said, with a city look about him. Not that I'd trust Hodge's eyes after darkies fond of his pint, you know. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind seized on the details. A nervous maid, a stranger in the lane. These were fragments, but fragments could build a mosaic. A stranger, she mused, handing over her coins for the notepaper. How curious. And Miss Vance's guests, I understand, were from London. Perhaps one of them was seen. Miss Weatherby leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That's what I said to Mrs. Clegg. And you know who was there, don't you? Mr. Gerald Rain, that producer fellow. Mrs. Price saw his car, a sleek thing, all chrome, parked at the Bungalow 2 days running. They say he's thick as thieves with Miss Vance, if you'll pardon the expression, and not the sort we want. In St. Mary Mead, mark my words, the mention of Gerald Rain, now a recurring note in the village's refrain, sharpened Miss Marple's focus. She recalled the silver cigarette case in Miss Vance's drawing room. Its initials G are gleaming in the light. Mr. Rain seems a busy man, she said mildly. I suppose he's helping Miss Vance through this ordeal. Miss Weatherby sniffed. Helping himself, more like. I read about him in the papers, always in some scandal or other. If you ask me, he's got more to do with this than meets the eye. She paused, then added, and there's talk Miss Vance isn't as flush as she makes out. Mrs. Price overheard her at the charity committee, fretting about bills. An actress, mind you, with all those jewels. It doesn't add up. Miss Marple tucked the notepaper into her reticule, her mind alight. Financial troubles, a dubious producer, a stranger in the lane. These were not answers but signposts, pointing to a motive yet unseen. She thanked Miss Weatherby and stepped back into the mist. Her next destination, the vicarage, where Mrs. Price, a woman of keen observation and looser lips, might offer more. The vicarage, a rambling house beside the church, was a haven of faded gentility. Mrs. Price, a plump woman with a penchant for floral dresses, welcomed Miss Marple into the parlour, where a fire crackled and a tray of seed cake awaited. Jane, how good to see you, she exclaimed, pouring tea from a chipped pot. I suppose you're here about the bungalow. Everyone is. I was there yesterday, you know, with Dolly Bantry. Poor Miss Vance was in such a state, though I must say, she looked rather fetching for a woman who'd just been robbed. Miss Marple accepted a cup, her eyes crinkling with amusement. She's an actress, after all, she said. They do know how to carry themselves. I heard you saw something of interest. The car, perhaps. Mrs. Price's face lit up, delighted to share. Oh, yes. A great black thing, parked near the bungalow the evening before the theft. I was out with the vicar's dog, you see, and there it was, all shiny and out of place. City plates, I'm sure of it. And then, at the charity committee last week, I couldn't help overhearing Miss Vance on the telephone. She was in the hall, you know, and voices carry. She was talking about money, saying she was in a bit of a scrape and needed funds. Soon I felt quite sorry for her, but now, with this theft, I wonder. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly in her lap. Financial strain, a city car, a nervous Madda. Pieces were accumulating, each adding depth to the puzzle. She thought of a case years ago when a young man in St. Mary Mead had claimed his watch stolen to cover a gambling debt. The watch, of course, had been pawned, and the truth had surfaced in the village's unguarded talk. Miss Vance, she suspected, was not so different. Her glamour a mask for desperation. "It's a pity," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "that Miss Vance should be so troubled. The theatre must be a precarious life, don't you think? One might do anything to secure one's future." Mrs. Price nodded, slicing the seed cake with vigor. "Exactly, and those parties she throws such a crowd. I saw them myself, driving through the village last week. Men in fancy suits, women with too much rouge, not our sort at all. And that Mr. Raineye read about him in the mail. They say he's got debts of his own and a temper when crossed. If he's mixed up in this, I wouldn't be surprised." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning over the producer's role. Gerald Rain, with his slick charm and shadowed reputation, was a figure of interest. His presence at the bungalow a thread that tied the theft to the wider world of London's theatre. She recalled a remark of her nephew Raymond's about the theatre being a place where everyone owes everyone else and no one trusts anyone. Rain, she mused, might be a creditor, a conspirator, or merely a bystander, but his name was too persistent to ignore. As the conversation drifted to the vicarage's leaky roof, Miss Marple steered it back with a deft touch. "You mentioned Elsie, the maid," she said. "She must be dreadfully shaken, poor girl. Servants often see so much, don't they?" Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. "Oh, they do. I heard from Mrs. Clegg that Elsie was at the butcher's yesterday, looking like she'd seen a ghost. She let slip that the bungalow was a madhouse the night of the theft, glasses everywhere, people laughing and shouting till all hours. And she said something odd about Miss Vance being up to something. Mrs. Clegg thought she meant the theft, but Elsie clammed up after that." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her heart quickened. Elsie's words, vague as they were, suggested unease, perhaps even knowledge. Servants, she knew, were privy to their employers' secrets, their loyalty often strained by what they witnessed. She thought of a housemaid in her youth who had confessed to stealing a brooch because her mistress's cruelty had driven her to it. Elsie, she decided, warranted a closer look. The visit ended with promises to meet at the upcoming fete, and Miss Marple stepped back into the village, the mist now lifting to reveal a pale blue sky. Her next stop was the Blue Boar, the village pub, where the grocer's boy, Tommy, was known to linger after deliveries. Tommy, a lanky lad with a knack for noticing what others missed, was sweeping the pub's doorstep when Miss Marple approached. "Good morning, Tommy," she said, her smile warm. "I hear you've been busy. With deliveries, you must see all sorts in the village." Tommy grinned, leaning on his broom. "Aye, Miss Marple, never a dull day. Been up to the bungalow a fair bit lately. Miss Vance orders heaps of fancy stuff, tinned caviar and such. Night of the theft, I was passing by late, delivering to Mrs. Hodge, saw a fellow near the bungalow, lurking by the hedge. City type, in a long coat. Didn't look right, if you know what I mean." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her tone remained casual. "How interesting. Did you see his face?" "Tommy, nah, too dark," he admitted. "But he moved quick, like he didn't want to be seen. I told Mr. Polk, but he said it's likely nothing. Still, I reckon it's queer, with the necklace gone and all." Miss Marple thanked him, slipping a shilling into his hand for his trouble. The stranger, the car, the maids, unease, the village, was a chorus, each voice adding to the melody of suspicion. She thought of Miss Vance, whose financial woes and theatrical flair suggested a motive beyond mere theft. The necklace, insured and publicized, was a prop in a larger scheme, and Gerald Rain, with his debts and influence, was likely its director or its dupe dart as she returned to Dane Mead Cottage. The village settling into the rhythm of midday, Miss Marple's mind was a whirl of connections. The whispers of St. Mary Mead, so easily dismissed as gossip, were a map to the truth, their details as precise as the stitches in her knitting. She thought of a saying from her childhood, often quoted by her mother: "What the heart hides, the tongue reveals." Miss Vance, she suspected, was hiding much, but the village, with its watchful eyes and wagging tongues, would not let her secrets lie at home. Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls, and outside, St. Mary Mead hummed with life. The affair at the bungalow was a drama, its players unaware of the quiet figure in the wings, piecing together their motives and moves. Miss Marple knew that patience and a keen ear for the village's whispers would bring the curtain down. For now she knitted and listened, certain that the truth, like a shy guest, would soon make its entrance. Chapter 5. The producer's visit. The morning broke over St. Mary Mead with a crisp clarity, the October sky a pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her small writing desk, penned a letter to her nephew Raymond, her neat handwriting a contrast to the whirl of thoughts in her mind. The theft of Miss Lydia Vance's emerald necklace had woven itself into the fabric of the village, its threads of gossip and suspicion growing ever more tangled. Her visits to the bungalow, the vicarage, and the post office had yielded a rich harvest of clues: the actress's polished distress, the undisturbed lawn, the whispers of financial strain, and the recurring shadow of Gerald Rain, the theatrical producer whose name clung to the affair like smoke. Today, Miss Marple sensed, would bring a new act in this curious drama, and she was determined to be in the audience. Her morning routine was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Hart, her daily help, ushered in Mrs. Bantry, whose bright scarf and flushed cheeks announced her excitement before she spoke. "Jane, you'll never guess," she exclaimed, settling into the armchair with a rustle of tweed. "Gerald Rain is in St. Mary Mead. Arrived this morning, bold as brass, in that flashy car of his. He's at the bungalow now, and the village is buzzing. I thought you'd want to know." Miss Marple's eyes sparkled, though her expression remained serene. "How very interesting, Dolly," she said, setting her pen aside. "Mr. Rain's arrival is timely, don't you think? I wonder what brings him here so soon after the theft." Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice dropping. "That's what everyone's asking. Miss Weatherby swears he's come to hush things up, and Mrs. Price thinks he's in on it. I saw him myself, Jane, striding into the bungalow like he owned it. A slick sort, all moustache and charm, but there's something shifty about him. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her knitting bag, began their familiar dance. "I make nothing of it yet, my dear," she said, her tone mild. "But people like Mr. Rain are rarely idle visitors. He may have business with Miss Vance." With her necklace, she paused, her mind turning over the producer's roll. The silver cigarette case with the initials G.R. The village's whispers of his debts. Miss Vance's evasive mention of her guest soul pointed to a connection deeper than mere friendship. She recalled a scandal in her youth, when a charming gentleman had persuaded a widow to part with her savings for a non-existent investment. Charm, she knew, was often a mask for calculation. Mrs. Bantry, impatient for action, proposed a walk to the village shop. "We might catch a glimpse of him," she said, her eyes gleaming, "and you know how the shop is full of talk. Come, Jane, let's see what's afoot." Miss Marple agreed, sensing an opportunity to observe Rain firsthand. She donned her coat and hat, and the two set off, the morning air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. The village was alive with activity. Children darted across the green, a farmer's cart rumbled past, and knots of women lingered at gates, their voices low but animated. The theft had given St. Mary Mead a rare thrill, and Rain's arrival was its latest chapter. At the shop, Mrs. Clegg was in her element, dispensing tea and opinions with equal vigour. "Saw him myself, I did," she was saying to Miss Hartnell as Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry entered. "Mr. Rain, bold as you like, buying cigarettes and asking after the post. City manners, all smiles, but I don't trust him. Mark my words. He's got a hand in this necklace business." Miss Hartnell, her face pinched with disapproval, nodded. "No good comes of theatre folk. I read about him in the papers. Owes money all over London, they say. And that Miss Vance, living like a queen when she's got debts of her own. It's not right." Miss Marple, selecting a tin of biscuits, listened with quiet attention. The villagers' verdict on Rain was unanimous. He was trouble, his charm a veneer for opportunism. She thought of the cigarette case, its presence in Miss Vance's drawing room, a silent testament to his influence. Was he a partner in her scheme, or merely a beneficiary of its fallout? The answer, she suspected, lay in his demeanour, and she resolved to meet him. As if summoned by her thoughts, the shop door swung open, and Gerald Rain himself stepped inside. He was a striking figure, tall, with a pencil-thin moustache, and a tailored suit that spoke of Savile Row. His dark hair was slicked back, and his eyes, a sharp hazel, swept the room with practised ease. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "A fine day, isn't it? I'll take a packet of those players, if you please, and perhaps a local paper." Mrs. Clegg, flustered but wary, handed over the items. Rain's smile was dazzling, but Miss Marple, standing quietly by the counter, noted the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed briefly on the counter. He was a man under pressure, she thought, his polish a shield against scrutiny. She seized the moment. "Mr. Rain, I presume," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "I'm Miss Marple, a neighbour of Miss Vance's. I was so sorry to hear of her loss. You must be a great comfort to her." Rain turned, his smile widening but his eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing her. "Miss Marple, a pleasure," he said, inclining his head. "Yes, poor Lydia's in a state. That necklace was a treasure, and to lose it like this, well, it's a blow. I came as soon as I heard, to see what I can do." "How kind," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly in her hands. "You must know her well, being in the theatre together. I understand her new play is much anticipated. Such a pity this theft should overshadow it." Rain's smile flickered, but he recovered swiftly. "Oh, the play will be a triumph. Mark my words. Lydia's a star, and this misfortune has only made her more determined. In fact, the papers are eating it up front page stuff. A stroke of luck, in a way, though I'd never say so to her." He laughed, a light, practised sound, but Miss Marple caught the slip. Luck, she thought, was a curious word for a theft, and his casual mention of publicity confirmed her suspicions about the affair's true purpose. "Luck," she said softly, her eyes meeting his, is often a matter of design, don't you think? I remember a young man in our village who once lost a watch, only to find it when his debts were paid. People are so clever at arranging things. Rain's smile faltered, and for a moment his composure cracked, revealing a flash of unease. "Quite so," he said, his tone cooler now. "But I assure you, Miss Vance is the victim here. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must get back to her. Good day, Miss Marple." He tipped his hat and left, his strides brisk, as if eager to escape her gaze. Mrs. Bantry, who had watched the exchange with barely concealed delight, pounced as the door closed. "Jane, you were marvellous. Did you see his face? He looked like a cat on hot bricks. What did you mean about design?" Miss Marple smiled, tucking her needles away. "Only that people are rarely as innocent as they seem, Dolly. Mr. Rain is a man with much to gain from Miss Vance's misfortune. We shall see how far his interests align with hers." The encounter had been brief but illuminating. Rain's charm, so carefully deployed, had wavered under her gentle probing, and his mention of publicity was a thread she could not ignore. She thought of Miss Vance's financial troubles, whispered by Mrs. Price, and the newly insured necklace, a detail yet to be explored. The theft, she suspected, was a gambit, its stakes tied to the theatre's precarious world, where fame and fortune hung by a thread. Determined to gather more, Miss Marple proposed a visit to the Blue Boar, where the village's menfolk often shared their own brand of gossip over pints. Mrs. Bantry, ever game, agreed, and they set off, the village green now bustling with midday activity. The pub, a low-beamed haven of polished brass and smoky air, was quieter than usual, its patrons subdued by the weight of the theft. Tommy, the grocer's boy, was there, polishing glasses behind the bar, and he grinned as Miss Marple approached. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, setting down a cloth. "Heard about Mr. Rain, I reckon. Saw him this morning, strutting about like he owns the place. Asked me if I'd seen anything odd the night of the theft. I told him about that stranger by the hedge, but he just laughed it off. Said I'd been reading too many detective stories." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled with interest. "Did he, now? And what did you make of him, Tommy?" Tommy shrugged, his young face thoughtful. "Dunno, miss, he's all smiles, but there's something sharp about him, like he's sizing you up. And he was in a hurry, kept checking his watch. Reckon he's got troubles of his own." Miss Marple nodded, her mind adding Tommy's impression to her growing tapestry. Rain's dismissal of the stranger was telling, suggesting either confidence in his own narrative or a desire to deflect attention. She thought of the car Mrs. Price had seen, the maid Elsie's unease, the villagers' whispers of Rain's debts. Each detail was a stitch, and the pattern was beginning to emerge. As they left the pub, Mrs. Bantry, bubbling with theories, pressed for Miss Marple's thoughts. "You think Rain's involved, don't you?" "Oh, Jane, it's like one of those plays at the Lyceum, all twists and villains." Miss Marple chuckled, her steps slow but purposeful. "Life is often like a play, Dolly, but its villains are seldom so obvious. Mr. Rain is a piece of the puzzle, but whether he's a player or a pawn, I cannot yet say. We must watch and listen and let the village tell us more." The afternoon waned, and Miss Marple returned to Dame Mead Cottage, her mind alight with possibilities. She settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed, the fire casting a warm glow across the room. The producer's visit had shifted the affair at the bungalow like a scene change in a well-staged drama. Rain's charm, his slip-about publicity. His unease under her gaze all pointed to a man with secrets, perhaps shared with Miss Vance. She thought of a saying from her childhood, often murmured by her father: "The smoothest tongues hide the sharpest blades." Rain, she suspected, was such a tongue, but the blade, be it greed, desperation, or something darker, remained hidden. Outside, St. Mary Mead settled into the quiet of evening, its whispers fading into the dusk. Miss Marple knew that the village, with its watchful eyes and restless tongues, would yield more clues in time. The affair at the bungalow was a performance, its script written in half-truths and careful omissions. She would unravel it, stitch by stitch, with the patience of one who knew that truth, like a shy bird, revealed itself only to those who waited. Chapter 6. The insurance matter. The sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a hesitant glow, as if reluctant to pierce the veil of mist that clung to the village's lanes and rooftops. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a cup of Earl Grey and a neatly folded copy of the local Gazette, turned her thoughts to the theft at Willow Bungalow. The affair, now a week old, had settled into the village's rhythm like a persistent melody, its notes of suspicion and intrigue growing sharper with each passing day. Her encounters with Miss Lydia Vance and Gerald Rain, coupled with the village's ceaseless whispers, had painted a vivid picture: an actress in financial straits, a producer with a slippery charm, a necklace too conveniently lost. Yet the puzzle remained incomplete, its edges blurred by unanswered questions. Today, Miss Marple resolved to pursue a new thread: the insurance of the emerald necklace, a detail that had flickered in her mind like a candle in a draught. The morning air was brisk as she set out, her black coat buttoned against the chill and her hat pinned with precision. Her destination was the office of Mr. Petherick, the local insurance agent, whose modest premises stood on the high street between the chemist and the haberdasher. Mr. Petherick, a man of meticulous habits and a penchant for detail, was known to Miss Marple from church committees, where his dry humour and sharp memory had often proved useful. If anyone could shed light on the necklace's insurance, it was he, and Miss Marple, with her knack for drawing out confidences, intended to make the most of his candour. The office was a small, orderly space, its walls lined with filing cabinets, and its desk cluttered with ledgers and fountain pens. Mr. Petherick, a wiry man with spectacles perched on a narrow nose, rose to greet her, his surprise tempered by courtesy. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," he said, offering her a chair. "I trust this isn't about your cottage insurance, though I'd be happy to review it." Miss Marple smiled, settling into the chair with her reticule on her lap. "No, Mr. Petherick, my cottage is quite secure, thank you. I've come about a more delicate matter. The theft at Willow Bungalow, you see. I understand you handle Miss Vance's insurance, and I thought you might ease my mind about the poor girl's situation. It's so distressing for the village, such a scandal." Mr. Petherick's expression grew guarded, but his professional demeanour held. "Indeed, a most unfortunate business," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Miss Vance did insure a necklace with us, yes, a valuable piece by her account. But I'm afraid I can't discuss the specifics. Client confidentiality, you understand." Miss Marple's needles emerged from her reticule, their soft clicking a soothing counterpoint to her gentle probing. "Of course, Mr. Petherick wouldn't dream of prying," she said, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "It's only that the village is so concerned for Miss Vance. She mentioned the insurance herself, you know, when I called on her." I thought it such a mercy that she'd taken precautions, especially for a jewel so recently acquired. It's not every day one insures something so grand, is it? Her words, light as a breeze, struck a chord. Mr. Petherick hesitated, his fingers tapping the desk. Recently acquired, you say? He replied, his tone cautious. Well, I suppose there's no harm in saying the policy was indeed new, taken out just 3 weeks ago, as it happens. The necklace was valued at a considerable sum based on Miss Vance's documentation. A prudent step, given its worth. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the timing. 3 weeks, a mere breath in the life of a jewel, yet long enough to plan a theft. She recalled a case in her youth, when a cousin's silver teapot had been insured days before it vanished, only to reappear when the insurance claim was questioned. How fortunate, she said, her voice soft. And the valuation, I suppose, was quite thorough. Such a large sum must require careful scrutiny. Mr. Petherick nodded, warming to the subject. Oh, quite thorough. Miss Vance provided a jeweller's certificate from London reputable firm, mind you, and photographs of the necklace. Emeralds, diamonds, platinum setting. The valuation was high, but not unreasonable, given the market. The policy will cover the loss, provided the theft is verified, of course. We've notified our adjuster, who will visit next week. Miss Marple's expression remained benign, but her thoughts raced. A new policy, a high valuation, a swift claim. The pieces fit too neatly, like a costume tailored for a role. She thought of Miss Vance's theatrical distress, her vague account of the theft, and Gerald Rain's slip-about publicity. The insurance, she suspected, was not a safeguard but a strategy, its payout a lifeline for an actress in debt. It must be a relief for Miss Vance, she said, to know she'll be compensated, though I imagine the process is quite rigorous to prevent misunderstandings. Mr. Petherick's lips twitched, as if suppressing a smile. Rigorous, yes. We're thorough about fraud, Miss Marple. Not that I'm suggesting anything of the sort here, but we do check. The police report, witness statements, the scene itself must align. Constable Polk has been most cooperative, though he's a bit out of his depth, poor fellow. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. Poor Mr. Polk, she murmured. He mentioned the French windows, no. Footprints, no signs of entry. It's a puzzle, isn't it? Almost as if the thief knew the house too well. Mr. Petherick's eyebrows rose, and he leaned forward, his professional reserve slipping. That's just it, Miss Marple. I said as much to my clerk. No footprints, no forced locks, and only the necklace taken. It's peculiar. If I were a suspicious man, I'd wonder if the thief was already inside. But Miss Vance insists her guests were above reproach, and who am I to argue? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her face betrayed nothing. Who, indeed? She said. People are so trusting, aren't they? I remember a time in St. Mary Mead when Mrs. Norton's pearl earrings went missing after a bridge party. Everyone thought it was a burglar, but it turned out her nephew had slipped them into his pocket to pay a debt. Families and friends can surprise us. Mr. Petherick chuckled, relaxing into his chair. You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple. If you were in my line, we'd have no claims unpaid. But you're right, things aren't always as they seem. I'll be curious to see what the adjuster makes of it. Miss Marple rose, her visit complete. Thank you, Mr. Petherick. You've been most kind, she said. I do hope Miss Vance finds some peace. It's a trying time for her. She left the office, her steps light but her mind heavy with new insights. The insurance policy, so recently secured, was a cornerstone of the theft's design, its timing a signal of intent. She thought of Gerald Rain, whose mention of publicity had betrayed a deeper agenda. Was he the architect, or merely a player in Miss Vance's script? The answer, she sensed, lay in the bungalow's shadows, where motives and alliances intertwined. The high street was bustling now, its shops and stalls alive with the village's daily commerce. Miss Marple, pausing to exchange pleasantries with the chemist's wife, overheard a snippet of conversation from two women at the baker's. That Rain fellow's still at the bungalow. One said, her voice sharp, "Saw him this morning, talking to Miss Vance on the terrace. Looked like they were arguing, if you ask me." The other nodded, her basket swinging. "No surprise there. My Tom says he's got debts up to his ears. Probably after her insurance. Money." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her suspicion confirmed. Rain's presence, his tension, his rumoured debts all pointed to a man with much to gain from the theft's success. She decided to visit the village green, where the daily ebb and flow of St. Mary Mead's life might yield more. The green was a patchwork of activity. Children played tag near the war memorial, a farmer haggled over apples, and a knot of women lingered by the church gate, their voices a low hum of speculation. Among them was Miss Hartnell, whose stern features softened at Miss Marple's approach. "Miss Marple, you're out and about early," she said, her tone a mix of curiosity and disapproval. "I suppose you've heard about Mr. Rain. The man's a menace, mark my words. My maid saw him at the station yesterday, sending a telegram probably to some shady associates in London." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled with interest. "A telegram? How intriguing. I met Mr. Rain myself, you know, at the shop. He seemed quite concerned for Miss Vance, though perhaps a little distracted." Miss Hartnell sniffed. "Distracted, scheming, more like. And that Miss Vancey's no better. My cousin in London says her last play was a flop, lost a fortune. Why else would she come to St. Mary Mead, if not to hide from her creditors? That necklace business is just a trick, I'll wager." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly in her reticule. The village's verdict was harsh, but not unfounded. Its collective memory a ledger of Miss Vance's misfortunes. She thought of a young woman in her past who had staged a fainting spell to escape a creditor's visit, her theatrics fooling all but Miss Marple, who had noticed the steady pulse beneath her pallor. Miss Vance, she suspected, was cut from similar cloth, her theft a performance for a far greater reward. Determined to test this thread, Miss Marple made her way to the Blue Boar, where the village's menfolk often gathered to dissect the news. Over pints, the pub was quieter than usual, its patrons subdued by the weight of the affair. Tommy, the grocer's boy, was sweeping the floor, his sharp eyes lighting up at Miss Marple's entrance. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, leaning on his broom. "Heard you met Mr. Rain? Queer sort, ain't he? I saw him yesterday, outside the bungalow, talking to a man I didn't know. Looked like they were having a right row. Rain was red in the face, waving his arms." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her smile remained placid. "A row, Tommy. How curious. Did you hear anything they said?" Tommy shook his head, his expression rueful. "Too far off, Miss, but the other fellow was a city-type fancy coat, hat pulled low. Looked like the sort I saw by the hedge the night of the theft. I told Mr. Pork, but he's got his hands full with Miss Vance's complaints. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind weaving Tommy's account into the tapestry. A stranger, a heated exchange, Rain's agitation. These were not random notes, but part of a larger score. She thought of the maid Elsie's unease, the village's whispers of Rain's debts, the insurance policy's suspicious timing. The theft was a machine, its gears turning on greed and deception. And Miss Vance, with Rain at her side, was its engineer. As she left the pub, the village green now bathed in midday light, Miss Marple considered her next move. A second visit to the bungalow was tempting, but she sensed that Miss Vance, guarded by Rain's presence, would reveal little. Instead, she resolved to speak with Elsie, whose nervous glances and cryptic remarks suggested a knowledge too heavy to bear. Servants, Miss Marple knew, were the silent witnesses to their master's sins, their loyalty a fragile shield against the truth. Returning to Mead cottage, she paused at the gate, her eyes scanning the village's rooftops. St. Mary Mead was a stage, its players unaware of the quiet figure in the wings, collecting their secrets like pebbles in a stream. She thought of a saying from her father, often murmured over his pipe. The truth is a shadow, Jane, cast by what is hidden. The insurance matter had cast a long shadow, its shape pointing to a scheme as bold as it was brittle. Miss Marple knew that patience and a careful ear for the village's pulse would bring the hidden into light. Inside, she settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed. The fire's glow a warm counterpoint to the chill of her thoughts. The affair at the bungalow was a drama, its script written in half-truths and calculated risks. Miss Vance and Rain, she suspected, were its stars. But the stage was crowded with other Celsi, the stranger, the village itself. She would unravel their roles, stitch by stitch, with the certainty of one who knew that truth. Like a buried seed, always found its way to the surface. Chapter 7. The night in question, the twilight settled over St. Mary Mead with a gentle hush. The village's lanes bathed in the soft purple of an October evening. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her drawing-room window, watched the last light fade. From the sky, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The theft at Willow Bungalow had woven itself into the village's tapestry, its threads of intrigue tightening with each new revelation. Her inquiries, discreet visits to the bungalow, the insurance agent, the village shop had yielded a mosaic of clues. Miss Lydia Vance's calculated distress, Gerald Rain's slippery charm, the suspiciously timed insurance policy, and the whispers of a stranger lurking in the shadows. Yet the heart of the matter, the night of the theft itself, remained elusive, a scene played out behind a curtain she had yet to lift. Tonight, Miss Marple resolved to draw closer to that night, to unravel its secrets through the one-man task. With its investigation, Constable Palk, the decision to invite Polk for tea had come after careful thought. The constable, a sturdy man with a plodding manner and a deep-rooted respect for St. Mary Mead's traditions, was no match for the complexities of a theatrical deception, but his observations, however unpolished, were gold to a mind like Miss Marple's. She had sent a note that morning, couched in the language of neighbourly concern, and Polk had accepted with a touch of bemusement. Unaccustomed to such invitations from the village's genteel spinster at precisely 6 o'clock, the knock came, and Mrs. Hart, Miss Marple's daily help, showed Polk into the drawing-room. He stood awkwardly in his uniform, helmet tucked. Under his arm, his broad face flushed from the evening chill. "Evening, Miss Marple," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Kind of you to ask me over. I hope it's no trouble." "No trouble at all, Mr. Polk," Miss Marple replied, her smile warm as she gestured to an armchair by the fire. I thought a cup of tea might do us both good, with all this bother at the bungalow. Do sit down and tell me how you're getting on. Pock settled into the chair, his bulk making the cushions sigh, and accepted a cup of tea with a nod of thanks. The room, with its chintz curtains and polished mahogany, seemed to ease his tension, and Miss Marple, pouring from a silver pot, let the silence work its magic. She knew that men like Poke, steadfast but unaccustomed to subtlety, often revealed more when unhurried, their thoughts spilling like coins from a loosened purse. "It's a right puzzle, ma'am," Poke began, stirring his tea with a clink of the spoon. "Never had a case like this in St. Mary Mead. Jewels stolen, no sign of a break-in, and Miss Vance carrying on like it's the end of the world. I've been over the bungalow top to bottom, but I'm no nearer to an answer than I was a week ago." Miss Marple's needles emerged, their soft clicking a soothing rhythm. "It must be terribly trying," she said, her voice gentle but probing. "I understand the French windows were open, but no footprints were found. That's most unusual, isn't it? I recall a time when old Mr. Grayson's shed was robbed, and the thief left tracks clear as day in the mud." Poke nodded, his brow furrowing. "That's the queer thing, Miss Marple. Those windows were ajar, right enough, and Miss Vance swears she locked M before bed, but the lawn outside, not a mark, not a blade of grass bent. The dew was thick. That morning I checked myself and it was untouched. No thief could have crossed that lawn without leaving a trace, not unless he was a ghost." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled, though her expression remained serene. The absence of footprints, a detail that had nagged at her since Mrs. Bantry's account, was a silent witness to the theft's true nature. She thought of a case in her youth, when a maid's tale of a prowler had collapsed because the garden path showed no signs of disturbance. "A ghost, indeed," she murmured, "and the room itself, Mr. Pock, was anything else amiss?" Poke shook his head, sipping his tea. "Nothing, ma'am. The dressing table was tidy as you please, pearl brooch, a couple of rings, all left behind. Only the necklace was gone. No scratches, no broken locks, no sign of a struggle. It's like the thing just vanished into thin air." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the tidiness of the scene. A thief, even a careful one, would leave some tracer, smudge, a displaced object, a hint of haste. The pristine state of the room suggested either an impossibly skilled intruder or no intruder at all. She thought of Miss Vance's theatrical poise, her vague account of her guests, and Gerald Rain's offhand remark about publicity. The theft, she suspected, was a performance. It's stage set with precision to deceive. And Miss Vance's guests, Miss Marple continued, offering a plate of scones. They were from London, I believe. It must be difficult, with so many strangers in the house, to know where to look. Poke took a scone, his fingers dwarfing the delicate pastry. "That's another headache," he admitted. "She gave me a list 3 names, all theatre folk. Mr. Gerald Rain, you've met him, I reckon. Then there's Miss Clara Holt, a costume designer, and Mr. Simon Vale, a playwright. They all swear they were together in the drawing-room till late, drinking and talking. No one went near Miss Vance's bedroom, they say, and they left around 1 in the morning. I've no reason to doubt M, but they're a slippery lot, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the names. Clara Holt and Simon Vale were new players in the drama, their roles yet to be defined. She recalled the villagers' whispers of a chaotic party, glasses strewn about, music till all hours. Such a gathering offered cover for mischief, but the guests' mutual alibis formed a tight knot, one she would need to unravel. And the servants, she asked, her tone light. I understand Miss Vance has a maid, Elsie, and a cook. They must have been busy with such a party. Polk's face brightened, as if relieved to share the burden. Aye, there's Elsie, a nervous little thing, and Mrs. Gibbs, the cook. They were in their quarters by 10, they say, dead to the world. Elsie did mention clearing up some glasses before bed, but she saw nothing odd. Mrs. Gibbs is a sound sleeper, says she heard nothing but the gramophone till it stopped. I've questioned both, but they're loyal to Miss Vance, or scared. Of her, maybe. Hard to tell. Miss Marple's needles resumed, their rhythm a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Elsie's nervousness, noted by the village and hinted at in her own visit, suggested a burden of knowledge, perhaps unspoken. Servants, she knew, were the unseen eyes of a household, their silence often bought by fear or loyalty. She thought of a parlour-maid in her past, who had confessed to hiding a stolen locket because her mistress's temper had cowed her into complicity. Elsie, she decided, was a thread to follow, her unease a clue to the night's true events. You've done splendidly, Mr. Polk, Miss Marple said, pouring him another cup. It's a tricky case, but you've gathered so much. I wonder, though, about those windows. If they were locked, as Miss Vance claims, how did they come to be open? It's a small thing, but small things matter, don't they? Polk frowned, his tea forgotten. That's been bothering me, ma'am. The locks sound no sign of tampering. Either Miss Vance forgot to lock him, which she denies, or someone opened them from inside. But who? The guests were in the drawing-room, the servants were asleep, and Miss Vance was in bed. It don't add up. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her face betrayed nothing. The windows, opened from within, were a crack in the theft's facade, suggesting a culprit already in the house. She thought of Gerald Raine, whose debts and influence made him a likely ally in Miss Vance's scheme. Or perhaps one of the other guests, Clara Holt or Simon Vale, had a motive yet unseen. The night in question, she sensed, was a carefully choreographed act, its players moving to a script only they knew. As Polk warmed to the conversation, fortified by tea and scones, Miss Marple steered him to the village's observations. The village has been most helpful, hasn't it? She said. I heard from Tommy, the grocer's boy, about a stranger near the bungalow that night, and Mrs. Price saw a city car parked nearby. It's all so confusing, but you must have made sense of it. Polk sighed, his shoulders sagging. I've heard it all, Miss Marple, but it's like chasing shadows. Tommy's stranger could have been anyone, a poacher, a tramp, even one of Miss Vance's guests. The car's a dead-end, no one got a clear look at it. I've got statements from half the village, but nothing solid. If I don't find something soon, the chief inspector'll take over, and I'll be back to chasing lost sheep. Miss Marple's smile was sympathetic, but her mind was alight. The stranger, the car, the guests' alibis, these were not dead ends, but signposts, pointing to a truth hidden in plain sight. She thought of a saying from her mother, often murmured over her sewing. The truth is like a knot. Jane pulled the right thread, and it comes undone. The night in question was such a knot, its threads tangled but not unbreakable. Their conversation drew to a close as the clock struck 7, and Polk rose, his helmet in hand. Thank you for the tea, Miss Marple, he said, his tone warmer. Now, it's done me good to talk it out. You've a way of making things clearer, if you don't mind my saying." "You're too kind, Mr. Pauck," Miss Marple replied, seeing him to the door. "I'm sure you'll find the answers. A thief who leaves no trace is either very clever or not a thief at all." She let the words hang, her smile disarming, and Pauck blinked, puzzled, before tipping his helmet and stepping into the night, alone. Again, Miss Marple returned to her armchair, the fire casting shadows on the walls. Pauck's account had been a window into the night of the theft, its details sharpening the puzzle's edges. The pristine lawn, the tidy room, the opened windows pointed to a deception staged from within, its players shielded by mutual alibis and theatrical flair. She thought of Miss Vance, whose financial woes and insured necklace suggested a motive as clear as glass. Gerald Rain, with his debts and talk of publicity, was a likely partner, but the other guests, Clara Holt and Simon Val, remained shadows, their roles undefined. Miss Marple's needles resumed, their clicking a steady pulse in the quiet room. She considered Elsie, whose nervousness hinted at secrets unspoken, and the stranger Tommy had seen, a figure who might yet tie the city to the village. The night in question was a tapestry, its threads woven with care to mislead. She recalled a case in her youth, when a stolen bracelet had been found in a guest's luggage, only to prove a ploy to discredit a rival. Miss Vance, she suspected, was no stranger to such ploys, her theft a gambit for survival in a world of fading fame. Outside, St. Mary Mead slept, its houses dark against the starlit sky. The village, with its watchful eyes and restless tongues, was a chorus in the drama, its voices guiding Miss Marple toward the truth. She knew that patience and a careful hand to untangle the knots would reveal the night's secrets. For now she knitted, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands, certain that the affair at the bungalow, like all human follies, would yield to the quiet persistence of one who saw what others missed. Chapter 8. The actress's motive. The October days in St. Mary Mead had taken on a golden crispness, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Miss Jane Marple, stepping out of Dame Mead cottage with her basket and shawl, felt the village pulse with a quiet energy, its rhythm quickened by the unresolved theft at Willow Bungalow. Her inquiries had woven a tapestry of suspicion. Miss Lydia Vance's theatrical grief, Gerald Rain's calculated charm, the suspiciously timed insurance policy, and the pristine scene of the crime, untouched by footprints or force. The night of the theft, as Constable Pauck had described, was a carefully staged act, its players shielded by alibis and deception. Today, at the village fete, Miss Marple aimed to gather more threads, to discern the actress's true motive in a setting where masks often slipped. The fete, held on the green beside the church, was a yearly ritual, a blend of charity and revelry that drew every soul in St. Mary Mead. Stalls laden with jams, knitted scarves, and homemade cakes lined the grass, while children darted through a makeshift maze of hay bales, their laughter mingling with the strains of a fiddler's tune. Miss Marple, her basket filled with contributions for the tombola, moved through the crowd with her usual unobtrusive grace, her eyes keen beneath the brim of her hat. She knew that fates, with their bustle and loosened tongues, were fertile ground for observation, revealing truths that parlours and police reports often concealed. Miss Lydia Vance was there. As expected, her presence a magnet for attention, she stood near the cake stall, her golden hair catching the sunlight, her laughter bright as she chatted with a cluster of admirers. Her dress, a soft blue that echoed the sky, was elegant yet understated, a nod to the village's sensibilities, but her emerald earrings knew. Miss Marple noted sparkled with a defiance that belied her role as a victim. The actress was in her element, her gestures fluid, her smile a beacon that drew farmers and gentry alike. Miss Marple, pausing to examine a jar of Mrs. Price's chutney, watched her closely, noting the ease with which she played the crowd. Her charm a polished weapon. Mrs. Bantry, ever the enthusiast, joined Miss Marple, her scarf fluttering like a flag. "Jane, isn't it marvellous?" she said, her eyes on Miss Vance. "She's like a queen, holding court. You'd never guess she'd lost a fortune in jewels. I swear she's enjoying this." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her needles clicking softly in her basket. "She does seem remarkably composed, Dolly," she replied. "Grief, I find, takes many forms, and some wear it more lightly than others. I wonder what brings her such cheer today." Mrs. Bantry's brow furrowed, catching the hint of something deeper. "You think she's up to something, don't you? Oh, Jane, you're incorrigible. Look, there's that Clara Holt, the costume designer. She's been hovering near Miss Vance all morning, and Simon Vale's over by the raffle, looking glum as ever." Miss Marple followed her gaze, her interest piqued. Clara Holt, a wiry woman with sharp features and a practical air, stood a few paces from Miss Vance, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. Simon Vale, the playwright, leaned against a tree, his thin frame hunched, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. Both had been guests at the bungalow the night of the theft, their alibis as seamless as Miss Vance's story. Miss Marple, recalling Polk's account, sensed that these two held pieces of the puzzle, their presence at the fete a chance to observe them unscripted. As the fete unfolded, Miss Marple drifted toward the needlework stall, where Mrs. Price and Miss Hartnell were selling embroidered cushions. Their conversation, predictably, turned to the theft, and Miss Marple, offering a compliment on a rose-patterned tea cosy, steered it gently. "Miss Vance seems in fine spirits today," she said, her tone mild. "It's heartening to see her. So resilient, though I suppose the insurance will ease her loss." Mrs. Price, slicing a fruitcake for a customer, nodded vigorously. "Resilient, that's one word for it. I heard from my cousin in London. She saw Miss Vance's last play. Said it was a dreadful flop. Lost a pile of money, and the creditors were circling. No wonder she's clinging to that insurance claim like a lifeline." Miss Hartnell, her lips pursed, added, "And those earrings she's wearing new, I'll bet, are not cheap. If she's so hard up, where's the money coming from? It's indecent, parading about like nothing's happened." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the earrings. A woman in debt, flaunting new jewels, was a study in contradictions, unless the debt itself was a fiction or a motive. She thought of a young widow in St. Mary Mead years ago, who had sold her late husband's watch to buy a silk dress, claiming it was a gift to quell suspicion. Miss Vance, she suspected, was no stranger to such sleights of hand. Her public resilience a mask for private desperation. Her attention shifted to Clara Holt, who had moved closer to the cake stall, her conversation, with Simon Vale now audible in snatches. Miss Marple, with the pretext of admiring a tray of scones, positioned herself nearby, her ears attuned to their words. Clara's voice, sharp and low, cut through the fate's hum. "She's milking it, Simon, and you know it. This whole theft. Nonsense, it's a stunt, and we're caught in the middle. She needs the money, and she's not above dragging us into her mess." Simon Vale's reply was a murmur, his tone bitter. "Let her play her games, Clara. I'm done with her schemes. If she thinks this'll save her career, she's dreaming. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. The words, unguarded in the fate's carefree air, were a crack in the facade, revealing a rift among the bungalow's guests. Clara's accusation of a stunt echoed Miss Marple's own suspicions, while Simon's weariness suggested a man tired of complicity. She thought of Gerald Raine, whose talk of publicity had hinted at a shared agenda with Miss Vance. Were Clara and Simon unwitting pawns, or had they played a role in the theft's design? The motive, she sensed, was tied to Miss Vance's faltering career, the necklace a prop in a bid for survival. Determined to learn more, Miss Marple approached Clara Holt, her basket swinging lightly. "Miss Holt, how lovely to see you," she said, her smile disarming. "Your embroidery on Miss Vance's costumes must be exquisite. I was just admiring the needlework here. It's so comforting to see such skill." Clara, caught off guard, softened at the compliment, her sharp features relaxing. "Thank you, Miss Marple, is it? I do my best, though costumes are a far cry from Tikosi's. It's a hard life in the theatre always, chasing the next job, the next paycheck." Her voice held a trace of fatigue, and Miss Marple, sensing an opening, pressed gently. "It must be terribly uncertain," she said, her needles clicking. "I heard Miss Vance has had her share of troubles lately, a play that didn't do well, I believe. It's a wonder she manages so well, with this theft on top of everything." Clara's eyes flickered, a mix of caution and candor. "She manages, all right," she said, her tone dry. "Lydia's a survivor, always has been. That necklace business, it's got her name in every paper, from here to London. Her new plays, selling tickets already, and she's not shedding any real tears, believe me. She's desperate for a hit, and this is her way of getting it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite concern, but her mind was alight. Clara's words confirmed the motive she had suspected. The theft was a publicity stunt. Its insurance payout a bonus to clear Miss Vance's debts, she thought. Of a village girl in her youth who had staged a fainting spell to win a suitor's attention. Her theatrics unraveling when her healthy appetite betrayed her. Miss Vance, she mused, was a grander version of that girl, her stage the world beyond. St. Mary Mead. Before Clara could say more, Miss Vance herself approached, her smile radiant. "Miss Marple, how delightful," she said, her voice a melody. "I do hope you're enjoying the fete. It's such a charming tradition, isn't it?" Her eyes flicked to Clara, a warning in their depths, and Clara, with a curt nod, excused herself, melting into the crowd. Miss Marple returned the smile, her needles steady. "Quite charming, my dear," she said. "You seem in fine spirits today. It's a credit to your strength after such a loss." Miss Vance's laugh was light, but her eyes were wary. "One must carry on, Miss Marple. The show, as they say, must go on. And the village has been so kind, it's a comfort, truly." She turned to greet a passing farmer, her charm effortless, and Miss Marple, watching her go, felt a familiar certainty settle in her bones. The actress's motive was clear: fame and fortune, salvaged through a theft that was no theft at all. The fate wore on, the sun dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the green. Miss Marple, joining Mrs. Bantry at the tambola, shared her observations in whispers, careful to avoid prying ears. "It's all for show, Dolly," she said, her voice low. Miss Vance needed a spectacle, and the necklace was her prop. But she's not alone. Mr. Rain, I suspect, is her director, and the others may know more than they let on. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, her excitement barely contained. Jane, you're a marvel, but how will you prove it? She's got everyone fooled, even Poke. Miss Marple's smile was serene, her needles a steady pulse. Proof comes in time. My dear, people talk, and scenes shift. We need only watch and wait. As the fete drew to a close, the villagers dispersing with baskets and prizes, Miss Marple lingered by the church gate, her eyes on the fading light. The actress's motive, laid bare by Clara's words and Miss Vance's own performance, was a cornerstone of the puzzle, but questions remained. What role had Clara and Simon played? Was Elsie, the nervous maid, a witness or a pawn? And the stranger Tommy had seen, where did he fit? She thought of a saying from her father, often murmured, "Over his books, the heart's desires are written in its actions." Jane. Miss Vance's actions, from her new earrings to her radiant smile, spoke of a woman determined to reclaim her stage, whatever the cost. Returning to Mead cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, the fire's glow a warm counterpoint. To the evening's chill, her knitting resumed, its rhythm a mirror of her thoughts. The affair at the bungalow was a drama, its climax approaching with the inevitability of a well-written play. St. Mary Mead, with its watchful eyes and restless tongues, was her ally, its whispers a guide to the truth. She knew that patience and a careful hand to trace the motive's threads would bring the curtain down. For now she knitted, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands, certain that the actress's scheme, like all illusions, would crumble under the weight of its own artifice. Chapter 9. The Hidden Truth. The morning sun broke through the mist over St. Mary Mead, casting a delicate light across the village's thatched roofs and dew-kissed gardens. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of tea and a slice of toast, gazed out at the quiet lane, her thoughts far from the tranquil scene. The theft at Willow Bungalow had become a labyrinth of motives and deceptions, its paths illuminated by her careful inquiries. Miss Lydia Vance's calculated charm, Gerald Rain's opportunistic presence, the timely insurance policy, and the staged scene of the crime all pointed to a theft that was no theft at all, but a gambit for publicity and profit. The village fate had sharpened her suspicions, with Clara Holt's unguarded words revealing Miss Vance's desperate need for a theatrical comeback. Today, Miss Marple resolved to return to the bungalow, to examine the stage itself and uncover the hidden truth that lay beneath its polished surface. Mrs. Bantry, ever eager for adventure, had insisted on accompanying her, and at 10 o'clock the two set out, their steps brisk in the morning chill. Mrs. Bantry's scarf fluttered like a banner, her voice bubbling with speculation. "Jane, I can't wait to see what you find," she said, linking arms with her friend. "That bungalow's like a stage set, isn't it? All props and illusions. Do you really think the necklace is still there?" Miss Marple's eyes crinkled, her basket swinging lightly. "I think, Dolly, that truth is often closer than we suppose," she replied, her tone mild but firm. "Miss Vance has played her part well, but every performance leaves traces. We shall see what the bungalow tells us." Willow Bungalow stood at the lane's end, its white walls aglow in the sunlight, its roses drooping under the weight of dew. The gravel drive was unmarked by fresh tire tracks, suggesting no visitors had come since Gerald Rain's arrival, and the air was still, broken only by the distant call of a thrush. Miss Marple noted the quiet, so at odds with the bungalow's reputation for late-night revelry. It was, she thought, a house playing a role, its serenity a mask for secrets. The door was answered by Elsie, the maid, whose pale face and fidgeting hands betrayed her unease. "Miss Vance is in the garden, ma'am," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll fetch her, if you like." Her eyes darted to Mrs. Bantry, then back to Miss Marple, as if seeking reassurance. And Miss Marple, with a gentle smile, seized the moment. "No need to trouble her just yet, Elsie," she said, stepping into the hall. "We've come to offer our sympathies again, and perhaps to see the room where this dreadful business happened. It's such a help, sometimes, to picture things clearly. You won't mind showing us, will you?" Elsie hesitated, her hands twisting. In her apron, but the weight of Miss Marple's kindly authority was too much. "I suppose it's all right," she mumbled, leading them through the drawing-room, where the gramophone stood silent and the velvet drapes hung heavy. Mrs. Bantry, barely containing her excitement, followed close behind, her eyes wide with anticipation. The bedroom, reached through a short corridor, was, as Miss Marple had glimpsed it during her first visit, a feminine haven of soft blues and creams, its French windows opening onto a small terrace. The dressing table, a delicate piece of walnut with a beveled mirror, stood against one wall, its surface bare save for a silver hairbrush and a crystal perfume bottle. The room was immaculate, its order a stark contrast to the chaos of the thefts. Narrative, and Miss Marple, pausing at the threshold, felt a familiar stirring in her mind. This was the stage, she thought, where the drama had been set, and its props held the key to the truth. Mrs. Bantry, unable to resist, strode to the French windows, peering out at the lawn. "Not a mark, Jane, just as Polk said," she declared, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "How could a thief get in without leaving a trace? It's impossible, unless they flew." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her eyes fixed on the dressing table. "Not impossible, Dolly," she said softly, "merely improbable, unless the thief was never outside at all." She approached the table, her fingers brushing the polished wood, and bent to examine it closely. The surface was smooth, but beneath a lace doily she found what she sought, faint scratches, barely visible, as if something heavy had been dragged across the wood. Her heart quickened, though her face remained serene. The scratches, she suspected, were no accident, but a sign of the necklace's fate. Mrs. Bantry, catching her friend's focus, joined her. "What is it, Jane? Have you found something?" she whispered, her excitement barely contained. Miss Marple straightened, her needles emerging from her basket. "Only a small thing, my dear," she said, her tone light. "But small things matter, don't they? This table has a story to tell, if we listen." She turned to Elsie, who hovered nervously by the door, her eyes wide. "Elsie, you must have tidied this room many times. Did you ever notice anything unusual about the table, a drawer, perhaps, or a hidden catch?" Elsie's face paled, her hands clenching. "No, ma'am," she said, too quickly. "It's just a table, same as any. I dusted, that's all." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple, with the instinct of one who had unravelled many secrets, saw the truth in her fear. Elsie knew something, perhaps more than she dared admit, and the table was its keeper. Before Miss Marple could press further, Miss Vance appeared, her entrance as dramatic as any stage star's. Her silk dress rustled, and her smile, though warm, held a trace of wariness. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, what a surprise," she said, her voice a melody. "I was in the garden, enjoying the air. How kind of you to call again." I hope Elsie's been looking after you. Mrs. Bantry, ever the enthusiast, launched into a flurry of compliments, giving Miss Marple time to observe. Miss Vance's composure was flawless, but her eyes flicked to the dressing table, a fleeting glance that spoke volumes. She was uneasy, Miss Marple thought, her performance strained by the proximity of her secret. The scratches, the maids. Fear, the actress's vigilance all pointed to a truth hidden in plain sight. We were just admiring your room. My dear, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. Such a charming space, though it's a pity it's been touched by this trouble. I couldn't help noticing the dressing table so elegant, and yet it seems to have suffered a little, hasn't it? Those scratches, I mean. Miss Vance's smile tightened, her hand brushing a curl from her forehead. Scratches, she said, her laugh light but forced. Oh, it's an old piece, you know, bound to have a few marks. I hardly notice them. She moved the table, adjusting the doily with a casual air, but Miss Marple saw the tension in her fingers, the way her gaze lingered on the wood. Mrs. Bantry, sensing the moment, chimed in. It's a lovely table, all right, but Jane's got an eye for these things. She's always spotting what the rest of us miss. Why, she found a chip in my best teapot last week. Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady rhythm in the charged air. It's only a habit, Dolly, she said, her eyes on Miss Vance. I find that objects, like people, tell stories if you look closely. This table, for instance, those scratches suggest something heavy was moved, perhaps in haste. It's curious, don't you think, for a room so tidy? Miss Vance's composure wavered, her smile faltering. I'm sure it's nothing, she said, her voice a touch too sharp. Elsie, do fetch some tea for our guests. We mustn't keep them standing. The maid scurried off, her relief palpable, and Miss Vance turned to the French windows, opening them with a flourish. Let's have some air, shall we? It's such a fine day. Miss Marple followed her to the terrace, her mind racing. The scratches were a clue, a tangible link to the necklace's fate, and Miss Vance's reaction confirmed their significance. She thought of a case in her youth when a stolen locket had been found in a secret drawer, its hiding place betrayed by a scuff on the wood. The bungalow, she suspected, held a similar secret, its truth concealed by the actress's artifice. The terrace overlooked the lawn, its grass as pristine as Pock had described, the dew long since burned away by the sun. Miss Marple, stepping to the edge, studied the ground with care. The lawn was smooth, but near the window she noticed a faint depression, barely discernible, as if something, a box, a stool, or a small ladder, had been placed there briefly and removed. Her heart quickened, though her face remained placid. What a lovely view, she said, her tone conversational. This terrace must be a delight in the evenings, though I suppose it's quiet now, with all the trouble. Miss Vance nodded, her smile restored but brittle. It's been a trial, Miss Marple, but one must persevere. The insurance will help, of course, and the publicity, well, it's been a blessing in disguise. My new play is drawing crowds already. Her words, meant to deflect, were a misstep, and Miss Marple, with the precision of a fencer, seized the opening. How fortunate, she said, her eyes meeting Miss Vance's. Publicity is such a curious thing, isn't it? I remember a young woman in our village who once claimed her ring was stolen, only to find it when her suitor proposed. The attention, you see, was worth more than the ring itself. Miss Vance's laugh was strained, her hands fluttering. Oh, charming story, Miss Marple, but I assure you, my necklace is truly gone. A thief, not a suitor, is to blame. She turned back to the room, her movements brisk, as if eager to end the conversation. Mrs. Bantry, sensing the tension, launched into a monologue about the fate, giving Miss Marple time to reflect. The depression in the grass, like the scratches on the table, was a silent witness, suggesting not an entry but an Exeter moment when the necklace, or its hiding place, had been moved. She thought of Gerald Rain, whose debts and talk of publicity made him a likely ally, and Clara Holt's accusation of a stunt. The truth, she sensed, was not in the theft but in its aftermath. The necklace hidden to secure both money and fame. Elsie returned with a tray of tea, her hands trembling as she set it down. Miss Marple, offering a kind word, noted the girl's pallor, her eyes darting to the dressing table. The maid, she decided, was the key, her fear a bridge to the hidden truth. But pressing her now, under Miss Vance's watchful gaze, would yield nothing. Instead, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her conversation light, her mind mapping the next step. As they left the bungalow, Mrs. Bantry could barely contain herself. "Jane, you were brilliant," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Those scratches that mark on the grass, you found something, haven't you? Is the necklace still there?" Miss Marple's smile was serene, her basket swinging lightly. "I've found questions, Dolly, and questions are the path to answers. The bungalow has spoken, but we must listen carefully. Miss Vance is guarding. Her secret, but secrets, like shadows, cannot hide forever." The village green was quiet as they returned, the fate's remnants cleared away, leaving only the scent of trampled grass. Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. The scratches, the depression, Elsie's fear, Miss Vance's unease. She thought of a saying from her mother, often murmured over her embroidery. "The truth is a needle, Jane, threading through the fabric of lies." The hidden truth, she knew, was close, its shape emerging with each careful stitch. At Mead cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair. Her knitting resumed, the fire's glow a warm counterpoint to the day's chill. The affair at the bungalow was a puzzle, its pieces falling into place with the inevitability of a well-told tale. St. Mary Mead, with its watchful eyes and restless tongues, was her ally, its whispers a guide to the actress's deception. She knew that patience and a gentle hand to trace the truth's threads would bring the necklace and its motivant to the light. For now, she knitted, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands, certain that the hidden truth, like a buried treasure, would soon be hers to uncover. Chapter 10. The confrontation. The evening shadows lengthened across St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a velvet hush that belied the undercurrents of intrigue swirling through its lanes. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her drawing-room at Mead cottage, watched the firelight dance on the walls, her knitting needles still for once, her mind a whirl of clarity. The theft at Willow Bungalow had unfolded like a play, its acts revealing a carefully staged deception. Miss Lydia Vance's calculated performance, Gerald Rain's complicity in the pursuit of publicity, the suspiciously timed insurance policy, and the pristine crime scene, marred only by faint scratches and a subtle depression in the grass. Her visit to the bungalow had confirmed her suspicions. The necklace was not stolen, but hidden, a prop in a scheme to secure both fame and fortune. Tonight, Miss Marple resolved to bring the curtain down, to confront the players and lay bare the truth in a setting of her own choosing. The decision to invite Miss Vance, Gerald Rain, and Constable Pock to her cottage had been deliberate, a quiet assertion of control over the drama's climax. She had penned the invitations with care, her words cloaked in neighbourly concern, suggesting a discussion to ease the village's worries about the theft. Poke, ever dutiful, had accepted with a touch of curiosity. Miss Vance, after a moment's hesitation, had agreed, her reply laced with theatrical graciousness. Rain, perhaps sensing a shift in the wind, had consented with a curt note, his usual charm subdued. Miss Marple knew that confrontation, like knitting, required precision, a steady hand to weave the threads of evidence into a pattern none could deny. The drawing-room was prepared with her usual attention to detail. The fire crackled warmly, casting a glow over the chintz armchairs and polished mahogany table. A tray of sherry glasses and a decanter stood ready, their crystal catching the light. Her knitting basket, a silent sentinel, rested by her chair. Mrs. Hart, sensing the occasion's weight, had polished the silver to a gleam before retiring, leaving Miss Marple to await her guests in the stillness of early evening at 7 o'clock. The first knock came, and Constable Pock entered, his uniform crisp, his helmet tucked under his arm. "Evening, Miss Marple," he said, his broad face creased with uncertainty. "Not sure what you're planning, ma'am, but I'm grateful for the chance to talk it over. This bungalow business has me stumped." Miss Marple smiled, gesturing to a chair. "You've done splendidly, Mr. Pock," she said, her voice gentle. "Sometimes a fresh perspective is all that's needed. Do make yourself comfortable. We'll have company soon." Moments later, Miss Vance and Gerald Rain arrived together, their entrance a study in contrasts. Miss Vance, in a silk dress of deep emerald, moved with the grace of a stage star, her golden hair catching the firelight, her smile radiant but guarded. Rain, in a tailored suit, exuded his usual polish, but his eyes, sharp and restless, betrayed a man on edge. "Miss Marple, how charming of you to invite us," Miss Vance said, her voice a melody as she settled onto the sofa. "I do hope we can put this dreadful affair to rest. The village has been so kind, but the gossip, well, it's exhausting." Rain nodded, his moustache twitching. "Quite right, Lydia. A quiet chat might clear the air. Constable, any progress?" His tone was light, but Miss Marple caught the undercurrent of tension, the way his fingers drummed briefly on his knee. Pock, sipping the sherry Miss Marple offered, shook his head. "Slow going, sir. No prints, no tracks, just a lot of questions. But Miss Marple's got a sharp mind. Reckon she's got something up her sleeve." Miss Marple's eyes crinkled, her hands folded in her lap. "Only a wish to help, Mr. Pock," she said, her tone disarming. "This theft has troubled St. Mary Mead, and I thought we might pool our thoughts. Miss Vance, you've been so brave, but it must be a strain, losing such a treasure. Perhaps you could tell us again how it happened. Sometimes the smallest detail sparks a revelation." Miss Vance's smile held, but her eyes flickered, a shadow passing over her composure. "Of course, Miss Marple," she said, her hands smoothing her dress. "It's simple, really. I had a small gathering that night, just dear friends, Gerald among them. We talked, played music, nothing out of the ordinary. I retired late, leaving the necklace on my dressing table, as I always do. I locked the French windows. Myself, I'm certain of it. By morning, the necklace was gone, and the windows were ajar. A thief, clearly, though how they managed it, I can't imagine." Rain nodded, his voice smooth. "A slick job, no doubt. Lydia's been through enough without the village turning it into a circus. The insurance will help, but it's the principle of the thing, someone violating her home. Miss Marple's needles emerged, their soft clicking a counterpoint to the room's tension. She leaned forward, her gaze steady but kind, her voice as gentle as a breeze. It is a violation, Mr. Rain, and yet the scene is so curious, isn't it? No footprints on the lawn, no signs of force, only the necklace taken. I visited the bungalow yesterday, you see, with Mrs. Bantry. The dressing table caught my eye, such a lovely piece, but those scratches beneath the doily, as if something heavy was moved, and the grass by the terrace, faint mark, like a box or stool placed there briefly. It made me think, Miss Vance, that perhaps the necklace never left the bungalow at all. The room stilled, the fire's crackle suddenly loud. Miss Vance's smile froze, her hands clenching in her lap, while Rain's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Poke, sensing the shift, set down his glass, his broad face alert. "What are you saying, Miss Marple?" he asked, his voice low. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her tone unwavering. "I'm saying, Mr. Poke, that the theft was no theft at all. Miss Vance, I believe you hid the necklace yourself, in a secret compartment in that dressing table, to claim the insurance and boost your fame. The French windows were opened from within, not to let a thief in, but to suggest one. The scratches, the mark in the grass, they tell a story of a jewel concealed, not stolen. Your new play, I hear, is selling tickets, thanks to the publicity, and the insurance payout would clear your debts. It's a clever plan, my dear, but cleverness leaves traces." Miss Vance laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, her eyes flashing. "Miss Marple, that's absurd. I'm the victim here. A thief took my necklace, my most precious possession. You can't seriously think I'd stage such a thing. Gerald, tell her." Her voice trembled, but Miss Marple saw the calculation beneath it, the actress reaching for her role. Rain leaned forward, his charm a thin veneer. "With respect, Miss Marple, you're spinning a tale with no proof. Lydia suffered enough without wild accusations. The police have found nothing to suggest she's lying. You, Constable." Poke shifted, his face troubled. "Well, sir, it's true, there's no evidence of a break-in, and those scratches. I hadn't noticed but Miss Marple's got a point about the lawn. I'm listening, ma'am, go on." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her gaze moving between Miss Vance and Rain. "Thank you, Mr. Pock. Let me add another thread. The insurance policy, taken out just weeks before the theft, was for a sum far greater than the necklace's likely worth, a jeweller's certificate, perhaps from a less than scrupulous source. And Mr. Rain, your remark at the shop about the theft being a stroke of luck for publicity was telling. You've both profited, haven't you? Miss Vance's name is in every paper, and your debts, Mr. Rain, are no secret in London. The village knows. You see people talk, and truths slip out." Rain's face darkened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "That's slander, Miss Marple," he snapped. "I came to help Lydia, not to orchestrate some scheme. You've no right to drag my name into this without evidence." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes meeting his with quiet certainty. "Evidence, Mr. Rain, is in the details. The maid, Elsie, has been most uneasy. She knows something, doesn't she, Miss Vance? I saw it in her eyes when I asked about the dressing table. And Clara Holt, your guest that night, let slip at the fate that this was a stunt, a desperate bid to save Miss Vance's career. The pieces fit, you see, like a pattern in my knitting. The necklace is still in that table, hidden in a compartment only you, Miss Vance, would know. Miss Vance rose, her face pale, her hands trembling. "This is outrageous," she cried, her voice breaking. "I won't sit here and be accused like some common criminal. Gerald, we're leaving." She moved toward the door, but Polk, with a glance at Miss Marple, stood, his bulk a silent barrier. "Now, miss, let's not be hasty," he said, his tone firm. "Miss Marple's raised some fair points, and I reckon we ought to check that table. If there's nothing there, no harm done. But if she's right—" He let the words hang, his eyes steady. Miss Vance's composure crumbled, her shoulders sagging as she sank back onto the sofa. Rain, his face a mask of fury, started to speak, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice soft but commanding. "Miss Vance, you're a fine actress, and this was a fine performance. But the village sees more than you think. The insurance, the publicity, the timing, it's all too perfect. Why not tell us the truth? It will be easier, my dear, than carrying this lie any further." The room was silent, the fire's glow casting shadows on Miss Vance's face. She covered her eyes with her hands, a sob escaping her lips, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It was my only way out," she said, her words halting. "The play failed, the debts piled up, and I was losing everything. The necklace, it was real, but I insured it high, with Gerald's help. We hid it in the table, in a secret drawer. The theft was to get the insurance money and the publicity. It saved my career. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, I swear." Rain's face twisted, his voice sharp. "Lydia, stop. You're ruining us both." But Miss Vance shook her head, tears streaming now, her defiance spent. "I can't, Gerald," she said. "She's right, they'd have found it eventually." "I'm sorry." She looked at Miss Marple, her eyes pleading. "You don't know what it's like, to be on the edge, to see it all slipping away." Miss Marple's expression softened, though her resolve held. "I know more of human nature than you might think, my dear," she said. "Desperation drives us to strange paths, but truth has a way of catching up. Mr. Polk, I believe you'll find the necklace in that drawer. It's time to end this." Polk nodded, his face a mix of astonishment and respect. "I'll head to the bungalow now, ma'am, and check it myself. Miss Vance, Mr. Rain, you'd best come along. We'll sort this proper." He moved to the door, his authority restored, and Miss Vance, with a final sob, followed, Rain trailing behind, his head bowed. As the door closed, Miss Marple settled back into her chair, her needles resuming their rhythm. The confrontation had been a delicate dance, each step measured to unravel the deception without breaking the players. She thought of a saying from her childhood, often murmured by her mother: "The truth is a mirror, Jane, reflecting what we dare not see." Miss Vance had seen her reflection at last, her scheme laid bare by the villagers' quiet vigilance and Miss Marple's unerringed eye outside. St. Mary Mead was still, its houses dark against the starlit sky. The affair at the bungalow was nearing its close, its secrets spilled in the firelight of a spinster's drawing room. Miss Marple knew that Polk would find the necklace, that the insurance claim would falter, that Miss Vance's star would dim under the weight of scandal. But she felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that truth, like a well-stitched seam, had held fast. She poured herself a small sherry, the glass cool in her hand, and sipped it slowly, her thoughts drifting to the village beyond her window. St. Mary Mead, with its gossip and its goodness, had been her partner in this unraveling, its voices a chorus to her silent deductions. The confrontation was over, but the story, she knew, would linger. a cautionary tale whispered over teacups and garden fences. For now, she knitted, her mind at peace, certain that the hidden truth, once revealed, would set the village free. Chapter 11. The Confession. The dusk settled over St. Mary Mead with a tender quiet, the village's cottages glowing faintly under the first stars of an October evening. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her drawing-room at Mead Cottage, felt the weight of the day's events like a shawl draped across her shoulders. The confrontation at her cottage had been a triumph of precision, unraveling the deception behind the theft at Bungalow with the clarity of a well-stitched seam. Miss Lydia Vance's tearful admission that she had staged the theft of her emerald necklace for insurance, money, and publicity had confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions, forged through days of listening to the villagers' whispers and studying its players. Gerald Rain's complicity, the hidden drawer in the dressing table, the untouched lawnel had fallen into place, a puzzle solved by patience and perception. Yet the drama, Miss Marple knew, was not quite over. The confession, though heartfelt, required verification, and the village's reaction would shape the affair's final act. Constable Polk had left her cottage with Miss Vance and Rain in tow, bound for the bungalow to retrieve the necklace from its secret hiding place. Miss Marple, declining to join them, had chosen to remain at home, her role as orchestrator complete. She trusted Polk's diligence, tempered though it was by his plodding nature, to handle the physical evidence. Her task now was to reflect, to ensure no thread of the mystery remained unknotted, and to prepare for the inevitable ripple of gossip that would follow. The fire crackled in her grate, casting a warm glow over the chintz armchairs and the sherry decanter, still half full. From the evening's gathering, her knitting lay untouched, her mind too restless for its familiar rhythm. As she considered the confession and its consequences, the affair had begun with a sparkle of scandal. Miss Vance's arrival in St. Mary Mead a disruption to the village's sleepy cadence. Her emerald necklace, flaunted with theatrical flair, had drawn every eye, its loss a spectacle that thrust her back into the headlines. Miss Marple, from her quiet vantage point, had seen the pattern early. The actress's financial woes, whispered by Mrs. Price, the insurance policy, confirmed by Mr. Petherick, the pristine crime scene, described by Polk, and the faint clue scratches on the dressing table, a depression in the grass that betrayed the theft's true nature. Clara Holt's unguarded words at the fate had sealed the motive, a desperate bid to revive a faltering career. The confrontation, carefully staged in her drawing-room, had been the climax, Miss Vance's confession its denouement. Yet Miss Marple, ever cautious, knew that confessions, like performances, could hold layers of truth. Had Miss Vance acted alone, or was Rain more than a silent partner? And what of Elsie, the nervous maid, whose fear suggested knowledge she had not yet shared? These questions lingered, like shadows at the edge of a lamp's glow, and Miss Marple resolved to keep her eyes open, even as the case seemed closed. A knock at the door broke her reverie, and Mrs. Hart ushered in Constable Polk, his face flushed with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. He carried a small velvet box, its edges worn but intact, and set it on the table with a reverence that belied his usual stolidity. "Miss Marple, you were right as rain," he said, his voice thick with awe. "Found it exactly where you said in. A secret drawer in that dressing table. Had to pry it open, but there it was, the necklace, green as you please." Miss Vance broke down proper when she saw it, sobbing like a child. Mr. Rain, he just stood there, face like thunder. Miss Marple's eyes crinkled, her smile gentle but satisfied. "Well done, Mr. Polk," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Do sit down and tell me everything. I trust there were no difficulties." Polk settled into the chair, his bulk making the cushions sigh, and accepted a cup of tea from the tray Mrs. Hart had left. "No difficulties, ma'am, thanks to you," he said, stirring his tea with a clink. "We went straight to the bungalow, me, Miss Vance, and Rain." She tried to backtrack at first, saying it was all a mistake. But when I found the drawer hidden behind a false panel, clever as anything, she couldn't deny it. The necklace was there, wrapped in a bit of silk. "I've got it safe now, and I'll be taking it to the station tomorrow for the insurance folks to see." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze resting on the velvet box. And Miss Vance, how did she bear it, seeing her scheme laid bare? Polk's brow furrowed, his voice softening. "She was a wreck, ma'am, no two ways about it. Kept saying she had no choice, that her career was on the rocks and the debts were crushing her. Said she got the idea from a play she'd been in years ago, where a character faked a theft to pay off a blackmailer. Reckon she thought it'd be easy hide the necklace, claim the insurance, and ride the publicity to a comeback. She swore Rain wasn't in on the planning, just helped with the publicity after. He's denying everything, of course, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her mind sifting Polk's words. Miss Vance's confession, though wrenching, aligned with the evidence, but Rain's role remained a question mark. His debts, whispered by the village, and his slip-about publicity suggested a deeper involvement, perhaps as instigator rather than bystander. She thought of a case in her youth when a charming curate had persuaded a widow to lose her brooch to fund his gambling, only to claim innocence when caught. Rain, she suspected, was cut from similar cloth, his denial a shield against accountability. And Elsie? Miss Marple asked, her tone light but probing. "Was she there when you found the necklace? She's been so uneasy, poor girl." "Servants often see more than they say." Polk nodded, his face thoughtful. "She was there, ma'am, hovering like a ghost. Didn't say much, but when we opened the drawer, she gasped, like she'd known it was there all along. I questioned her after gentle-like, and she admitted she'd seen Miss Vance fiddling with the table late one night before the theft. Didn't think much of it at the time, but she's been scared stiff ever since, thinking she'd be blamed. Poor lass was near tears, saying she only kept quiet because Miss Vance was kind to her." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained serene. Elsie's admission, though belated, was a final thread, tying the maid's fear to the actress's deception. She thought of a housemaid in St. Mary Mead years ago, who had hidden a stolen spoon out of loyalty to her mistress, only to confess when the guilt grew too heavy. Elsie, she mused, had borne a similar burden, her silence a testament to the power of Miss Vance's charm. "You've handled it splendidly, Mr. Polk," Miss Marple said, pouring him another cup. "The necklace is found, the truth is out, and St. Mary Mead can rest easier. But what will happen now? Miss Vance, I suppose, faces consequences." Polk sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Aye, ma'am, there'll be consequences. I've telephoned the chief inspector, and he's coming tomorrow to take over. Fraud's a serious charge, and the insurance company'll want their say. Miss Vance might avoid prison if she repays what she's claimed, but her reputation's in tatters. As for Rain, we've no proof he planned it, but the inspector'll dig into his finances. He's not walking away clean, that's for sure." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the actress's tear-streaked face. her dreams of a comeback shattered by her own ambition. She felt no malice, only a quiet sorrow for a woman driven to such lengths by the theatre's cruel whims. Rain, she suspected, would slink back to London, his charm diminished but his cunning intact, ready to spin a new scheme. The village, with its unforgiving memory, would ensure their story lingered. A cautionary tale whispered over teacups and garden fences as Pock continued. Detailing the logistics of the case, Miss Marple's mind wandered to the village's role. In the affair, St. Mary Mead had been her silent partner, its gossip a map to the truth. Mrs. Price's whispers of Miss Vance's debts, Tommy's sighting of a stranger, Clara Holt's outburst at the fete hall had guided her, their voices a chorus to her deductions. She thought of a saying from her father, often murmured over his pipe: "The truth is a river, Jane, fed by many streams." The village's streams had flowed to her, their currents carrying the actress's deception to light. Their conversation drew to a close as the clock struck 9, and Poke rose, the velvet box tucked under his arm. "Thank you, Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm with gratitude. "I'd never have seen it without you. You've a gift, ma'am, for seeing what's hidden. Reckon the Chief Inspector'll want a word with you tomorrow." Miss Marple smiled, seeing him to the door. "You're too kind, Mr. Poke. I only listen, and the village does the rest. Do let me know how it goes. I'll be here with my knitting." She watched him disappear into the night, his lantern a bobbing glow, and closed the door. The cottages, quiet, enveloping her. Alone again, she returned to her armchair, the fire's embers casting a soft light across the room. The confession had been the affair's heart, its truth laid bare in the actress's broken voice. But Miss Marple knew the truth, like a gem, had many facets. She considered Rain's denial, Elsie's belated candour, the village's inevitable judgment. The necklace, now recovered, would return to its velvet box, its sparkle dimmed by scandal, while Miss Vance faced a future stripped of illusion. Miss Marple felt a pang of pity, tempered by the certainty that justice, however harsh, was necessary. She poured herself a small sherry, the glass cool in her hand, and sipped it slowly, her thoughts drifting to the broader canvas of human nature. Miss Vance's desperation was not unique. It echoed in the stories of St. Mary Mead. From the girl who lost a ring to escape a suitor to the shopkeeper who fudged his books to save his family. People, Miss Marple knew, were driven by fear and hope, their flaws as universal as their dreams. The affair at the bungalow was but one tale, its moral as old as the village itself. Deception, however clever, could not outrun the truth. The village, beyond her window, was dark, its houses huddled against the night. Tomorrow the news would spread Miss Vance's confession, the necklace's recovery, Rain's disgrace. Mrs. Bantry would be first at her door, demanding every detail, while Miss Weatherby and Mrs. Price would dissect the scandal at the post office. Miss Marple smiled at the thought, knowing that St. Mary Mead, with its restless tongues and watchful eyes, would weave the affair into its lore, a story to be told for years to come. She rose, setting the sherry glass aside, and moved to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. The affair had tested her, its layers of deceit a challenge to her quiet wisdom, but she had met it with the tools she knew best: observation, patience, and a deep understanding of the human heart. She thought of a moment in her childhood when her mother had found a lost brooch beneath a sofa, saying, "Things hide, Jane, but they're never truly gone." The necklace, like the truth, had been hidden but not lost. its discovery a testament to the village's unyielding gaze. Returning to her chair, Miss Marple took up her knitting, the needle's familiar rhythm a comfort in the stillness. The confession had closed a chapter, but life in St. Mary Mead would go on, its dramas small and large unfolding in the shadow of the church spire. She knew that new puzzles would come, new secrets to unravel, and she would be ready, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. For now, she knitted, the fire's glow a beacon in the quiet night, certain that the affair at the bungalow, with its tears and truths, had found its proper end. Chapter 12. The quiet of St. Mary Mead. The autumn sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a gentle warmth, its rays filtering through the bare branches of the elms and painting the village in hues of gold and amber. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of tea and a single boiled egg, gazed out at the garden, where the last roses clung defiantly to their stems. The affair at Willow Bungalow, which had stirred the village like a gust through dry leaves, had reached its resolution, its secrets laid bare in the firelit confrontation at her cottage. Miss Lydia Vance's confession that she had staged the theft of her emerald necklace for insurance money and publicity had unravelled a scheme as intricate as it was desperate, with Gerald Rain's complicity and the villagers' whispers guiding Miss Marple to the truth. Now, as the dust settled, St. Mary Mead was returning to its familiar rhythm, and Miss Marple, ever the quiet observer, reflected on the affair's aftermath, its lessons woven into the fabric of her understanding. The morning was crisp, the air carrying the faint tank of wood smoke as the village awoke. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, prepared for the day with her customary care, her thoughts lingering on the events of the past week. Constable Polk's visit, with the recovered necklace in its velvet box, had confirmed her deductions, the scratches on the dressing table, the depression in the grass. Elsie's fearful silence all had pointed to a deception orchestrated within the bungalow's walls. Miss Vance's tearful admission, spurred by the weight of Miss Marple's gentle but relentless logic, had closed the case, but its ripples would linger, shaping the village's gossip and the actress's fate. Her breakfast complete, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, her basket tucked under her arm, and set out for the village. The high street was alive with its daily hum. The butcher's boy whistled as he swept the pavement. Women lingered at the post office, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Yet beneath the routine, Miss Marple sensed a new current, a buzz of excitement that marked the affair's aftermath. The news of Miss Vance's confession had spread with the speed of a spring breeze, and St. Mary Mead, ever eager for a tale, was savouring its triumph. At the post office, Miss Weatherby presided with her usual air of authority, her thin lips pursed as she sorted letters. "Miss Marple, good morning," she said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "I suppose you've heard the latest. That actress, confessing to it all, hiding her own necklace. I always said she was no good, with her city ways and flashy jewels. And you, they say, had a hand in it. Is it true?" Miss Marple smiled, selecting a packet of envelopes from a shelf. "The village talks, Miss Weatherby, and I only listen," she replied, her tone mild. Miss Vance was in a sad state, I'm afraid, driven to foolishness by her troubles. It's a pity, but the truth is out, and that's what matters. Miss Weatherby leaned forward, her voice dropping. A pity. She's a fraud, plain and simple. Pock was in yesterday, saying they found the necklace right where you said, in some secret drawer, and that Rain fellow slunk off to London this morning, I heard, with his tail between his legs. Good riddance, if you ask me. But how did you know, Miss Marple? The whole village is wondering. Miss Marple's eyes crinkled, her fingers brushing the envelopes. I know very little, my dear, she said. But people are much the same everywhere, and their actions leave traces. A scratch, here a word, there it all adds up, like stitches in a pattern. She paid for her purchase and stepped back into the street, leaving Miss Weatherby to ponder her words, her curiosity only half satisfied. The village green was quiet, save for a group of children kicking a ball near the war memorial. Miss Marple paused to watch them, her thoughts drifting to Miss Vance's departure, rumoured to be imminent. The actress, Polk had confided, faced no immediate arrest. The insurance claim had not yet been paid, but the scandal had shattered her prospects. Her new play, briefly buoyed by the theft's publicity, was faltering under the weight of her disgrace, and her creditors, sensing weakness, were closing in. Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy, tempered by the knowledge that choices, like seeds, bore their own fruit. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Price, a reliable barometer of village sentiment, was pruning roses in the garden. Jane, you're a sight for sore eyes, she called, waving her secateurs. Come, have a cup of tea and tell me about this bungalow business. I heard you had Miss Vance and that Rain fellow at your cottage, and now she's confessed. It's like something out of a novel. Miss Marple joined her in the parlour, where a fire crackled and a tray of biscuits awaited. It's no novel, I'm afraid, she said, accepting a cup. Miss Vance was in desperate straits, and desperation makes fools of us all. She hid the necklace to claim the insurance and revive her career. I only pointed out what the village already knew in its way. Mrs. Price's eyes widened, her biscuit forgotten. The village knew. Oh, Jane, you're too modest. Polk says you spotted scratches on that table, and a mark in the grass things he'd never have noticed. And Elsie, poor girl, told my maid. She's leaving Miss Vance's service. Says she can't stay after all that deceit. But what about Rain? Was he in on it from the start? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. Mr. Rain is a man of many talents, but truth is not among them, she said. Miss Vance insists he only helped with the publicity, but his debts and his presence at the bungalow suggest a deeper role. The police will look into it, I'm sure, but he's a slippery one. I suspect he'll land on his feet, as such men often do. Mrs. Price nodded, her face a mix of indignation and awe. And to think it all happened here, in St. Mary Mead. I always said the actress was trouble, with her parties and her airs. But you, Jen, you've a gift, seeing through it all. How do you do it? Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, her needles emerging from her basket. I do nothing, my dear, she said, her tone light. I watch and listen and remember. People are not so different, whether in a village or a theatre. Their motives, greed, fear, hope are the same, and they leave traces like footprints in snow. Their conversation turned to the vicarage's leaky roof, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the affair's broader lessons. Miss Vance's scheme, though bold, was rooted in human frailty, a mirror to the small deceptions of St. Mary Mead, the shopkeeper who inflated his prices, the girl who feigned illness to avoid a suitor. The village, with its unforgiving gaze, had exposed her, its whispers a net that caught her lies. Miss Marple thought of a saying from her childhood, often murmured by her mother, "The truth is a lantern." Jane, lighting even the darkest corners. The lantern of St. Mary Mead had shone brightly, and Miss Vance, dazzled by its glare, had nowhere left to hide. Leaving the vicarage, Miss Marple made her way to the Blue Boar, where the villagers' menfolk gathered to dissect the news over pints. The pub was lively, its low beams echoing with laughter and debate. And Tommy, the grocer's boy, was polishing glasses behind the bar. "Miss Marple, you're a hero." He grinned, setting down his cloth. "Heard you cracked the Bungalow. Case wide open. Poke was in last night, saying you had that actress confessing like a sinner in church. How'd you do it?" Miss Marple chuckled, her basket swinging lightly. "No heroics, Tommy," she said. "I only ask questions, and—" Miss Vance answered. The village did the rest, with its eyes and ears. "You helped, you know, with that stranger you saw by the hedge. It made me think, and thinking leads to answers." Tommy's chest puffed out, his young face alight. "Blimey, miss, I didn't know I was part of it. That stranger reckon he was one of Rain's lot, maybe." "Poke," said. "Rain's gone now, left this morning on the early train. Good riddance, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on Rain's swift exit. His departure, though predictable, left questions unanswered. His true role in the scheme, his ties to the stranger Tommy had seen. She suspected he had encouraged Miss Vance's plan, perhaps even suggested it, his debts a spur to her desperation. But proof, like a rare flower, was hard to find, and Miss Marple, content with the necklace's recovery, let the question rest. Rain, she knew, would face his own reckoning. In London's harsher light, as she left the pub, the village green now bathed in midday sun, Miss Marple encountered Mrs. Bantry, who descended upon her with the force of a spring gale. "You're impossible," she exclaimed, linking arms. "I've been dying to hear it all, and you've been hiding away. Poke told Arthur everything, how you had Miss Vance and Rain at your cottage, how she confessed, how you knew the necklace was in that drawer. It's like a play, Jane, and you're the star. Come to Gossington Hall for tea and tell me every detail." Miss Marple laughed, allowing herself to be steered toward the hall. "You flatter me, Dolly," she said, her tone warm. "It was no play, only a matter of seeing what was there." Miss Vance was desperate, and desperation blinds us to consequences. The village saw her clearly, and I only followed its lead. At Gossington Hall, over tea and scones, Mrs. Bantry pressed for more, her eyes wide with delight. "But how did you know, Jane? Those scratches, that mark in the grasspot, says he'd have missed them entirely. And Elsie, poor thing, spilling it all to Poke after. You're a marvel, that's what you are." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly. "I'm no marvel, my dear," she said. "I've lived long enough to see patterns, that's all. Miss Vance was like a girl I knew in St. Mary Mead, who hid her mother's brooch to pawn it for a dress. The signs were the same fear, haste, a story to neat. The village knew her heart, and I only listened." Mrs. Bantry shook her head, her scarf slipping. "You're too modest, Jane. The whole village is talking about Miss Weatherby, says you should join the police. And Mrs. Price swears you're sharper than Sherlock Holmes. But what now? Will Miss Vance go to prison?" Miss Marple's expression softened, her thoughts on the actress's fate. "I hope not, Dolly," she said. "She's lost enough, her reputation, her dreams. The insurance company will decide, but I suspect she'll repay what she can and fade away. The theatre is cruel, you know, and she played her last role too, boldly. As for Rain, he's gone, but men like him always find another stage." Their conversation drifted to the fate's success, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the affair's moral. Miss Vance's scheme, though grand, was rooted in the same frailties that touched St. Mary Mead: ambition, fear, the lure of a quick escape. The village, with its relentless gaze, had judged her, its justice as sharp as it was silent. She thought of a moment in her youth when her father had found a lost coin in the church pew, saying, "What's hidden, Jane, is never truly lost." The necklace, like the truth, had been found, its discovery a testament to the village's enduring wisdom. As she left Gossington Hall, the sun dipping toward the horizon, Miss Marple walked slowly, savouring the village's quiet. The affair at the bungalow had been a storm, brief but fierce, and St. Mary Mead had weathered it with its usual resilience. Miss Vance would leave, her sparkle dimmed. Rain would scheme anew. Elsie would find a new place, her loyalty tested, but intact. The village, like a river, would flow on, its surface calm, its depths rich with stories. At Mead Cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, the fire's glow a warm embrace. Her knitting resumed, its rhythm a mirror to her thoughts. The affair had been a challenge, its layers of deceit a test of her quiet skill, but she had met it with the tools she knew best: observation, patience, and a deep faith in human natures. Patterns, St. Mary Mead, with its gossip and its goodness, had been her ally, its voices a guide to the actress's downfall. She knew that new dramas would come, new secrets to unravel, and she would be ready, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. Outside, the village slept, its houses dark against the starlit sky. The quiet of St. Mary Mead was a balm, its serenity a promise of order restored. Miss Marple, knitting by the fire, felt a quiet contentment, certain that the affair at the bungalow, with its lessons and its truths, had found its place in the village's lore, a tale to be told and retold, in the gentle cadence of its days.